Welcome to the Shropshire CCG board meeting. I think we were due to start at past, just check, which is past. So I'd like to welcome you to the Shropshire CCG board meeting. We've had some apologies. We've had apologies from Nikki Wilde and Gail Forts-Myers, and also from Jane Randall-Smith and Sarah Porter, and also NHS England through Vicky Taylor and Jane Chapman. I'd just like to confirm to everyone this meeting is being live streamed, partly due to the weather and partly due to the high level of interest that we felt was in the documents that we're going to discuss today. There's also a barrier up, and that's more to actually stop children coming towards where all the wires are, because we anticipated a number of children and young people turning up, so it is partly for sort of public safety. We need to go around with our members' declarations of interest. Obviously, in line with our new policy on declarations of interest, we need to declare everything, even if it's already previously been declared on the website, in regards to items on the agenda. So if we can start with Keith and then move around the table.
Yeah, I've got no declarations that are relevant to the agenda today.
Likewise, nothing to declare. Thanks, Chair. I'm Director of Public Health, obviously, for Shropshire Council. I'm also the Deputy President of the Royal College of Nursing.
I'm a GP in Whitchurch, hold contracts at Bridgewater Family Medical Practice and Clippitt Street Medical Practice.
I have no conflicts of interest to declare.
No additional conflict of interest, as already declared.
Likewise, no additional conflicts of interest.
Likewise, the same for me.
In terms of it, we have to declare all conflicts of interest, not just additional ones. Obviously, being a partner in a practice is just obviously providing care to patients, probably something that we ought to declare. So I understand you're Broseley and Highley, aren't you?
I'm a GP in Broseley and Highley.
Yep.
I do have no conflicts of interest.
I'm a manager partner in Cambrian, and I'm married to a board representative for Telford and Wrekin.
I'm a local GP, currently largely based at Bishop's Castle. My husband works for Shropshire with the GP service in A&E at Telford.
No conflicts of interest.
I'm a GP at Market Drayton. My dad is a county councillor for North Shropshire. He's also actually now a governor on the board of the West Mids Ambulance Service. He's a very busy man. He's a very busy man.
I'm a partner at Ponsbury Medical Practice, but no other conflicts of interest.
I have no conflicts of interest.
Nothing to declare from me either.
My wife is a partner at Beaches Medical Practice based in Hill, but nothing else.
No conflict of interest for me.
I have a relative who works at South.
No conflicts of interest for me.
Okay, I'll move on to my introductory comments. This is to remind the audience, which at the moment is fairly light, that this is a meeting held in public rather than a public meeting. That obviously today one of the key issues on there is our paper around the midwife-led units and our proposals. We're going to hear an explanation of how we've developed those proposals and why we're putting forward those proposals. There'll then be a discussion within the board, and then at the end of the service development section, of which the midwife-led unit paper is the last part, we'll open it up to public questions with regards to the midwifery paper. It's clear that some of these meetings we've had leading up to that involving the engagements have actually been quite challenging and difficult, and we're quite happy for challenge, but it needs to be, if not polite, but it needs to be controlled. During one particular evening session we did following the event have a member of the public who came up to us saying that they had felt they were unable to express their opinions due to the temperature and pressure of discussion in the rooms. Obviously we'd like to avoid that. As things stand at the moment, I don't see that that's going to be a particular challenge, but I would somehow anticipate that other people will be attending later. It's key that questions do come through the chair. As time is limited, because we do need actually to be out of the Sovereign Suite by 12:30, I think. Is it? 12:30. We had to move the meeting to in light of the public interest, that we do need to keep questions relatively short. We'd like to keep questions to questions rather than sort of essays or dissertations or political statements. Without much ado, if we move on then to the minutes of the previous meetings. The first meeting was held on the 8th of November, so if we initially go through it for corrections for accuracy. So we've got pages 1 through to 5, and then pages 6 through to 10, pages 11 through to the end of page 13. I'll do the matters arising once we've done the accuracy of the second set of minutes.
So,
Sorry.
Could I refer, please, to the bottom of page 13, item F. I believe there's a slight error here in that I believe that the question that was put to me was that I supported the closure of Whitchurch Community Hospital, as the subsequent minute mentions that was debated and discussed. But,
Okay, we'll make sure those minutes are corrected to reflect that. Sam?
Can I just note the action on the bottom of page 13 actually related to information regarding hospital reconfiguration rather than waiting times?
Right, okay. So if we can amend that as well, that'll be good. If we move on to the minutes of the extraordinary board meeting that was held on the 15th of November, if we'd like to look at those initially for conflicts, for any corrections and points from the papers, so pages 1 through to 5, and then pages 6 through to the end, which is page 7. If we then go back to the matters arising, which is page 14 of the minutes from the first meeting. The first point is around sustainable neurology services, and that's actually on the agenda today, so that will be dealt with. The second matter arising was Mr Skidmore to circulate further details of SATH contracted QIP.
We've actually remodelled the table in the quick report now to give more detail, so that will cover that off.
Okay, that's brilliant. Second one was around, next action point was again, second one for Claire to include likely best and worst case scenarios, and that's coming in this paper, so that's fine. Next one was to Claire to cross-check the figures in the finance and contract report in relation to SSFT, and that's been done. Yep. Moving on, the next actions relate to a CAMS update, which is on the agenda. Then the next action was for Dr Davis to share information relating to the SSFT with locality boards, and that's been done.
Let's go through all the locality boards, yes.
And then the next item was Dr Davis to present a report on 111 to the next executive team and the clinical commissioning committee. So
there's been a slight delay with that because we only received the final data that we required from the ambulance service on Monday of this week, on the 11th. So we'll have to take that forward in January now. We've got it to analyse, but that will come through in the future.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next page, first action for Dawn is Dawn Clark to ensure concerns regarding the new model of the Learning Disability Services raised with the SSFT.
Yes, we've got a meeting with the council leads on this to map out exactly what is available and then go to the SSFT with them.
Okay, thank you. Next one is for Dr Davis to ensure concerns regarding CAMS is included in the data quality improvement plan.
Yeah, I've raised that with Erica Crisp, the contract manager, and that'll be part of the contracting process for the next year.
Thank you. Next one was Mrs Flaherty to provide members with information relating to the Norbury Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit, Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit, that's on the board paper. Moving down, we've got Ms Clark to present the quality strategy and supporting delivery plan, and that's been deferred to January. Then also to clarify the process and template for annual assessments of looked after children.
Yes, this is around the GP templates, and this was a recommendation through the CPC review and discussed as a pilot with Jess, I believe, at the time. So it's under pilot at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Next one was scheduled for January was Mrs Tilley to present a revised governing body assurance framework, and that's coming to January. Then there's an action for Mr Phil Evans, and he's presenting an STP written report of future governing body meetings. That's been provided. for this meeting. Moving on to the third page, Dr Davis to seek clarification on Mr Wright's comments in relation to agency and locum staff.
Yeah, there were two parts of that. One was around clarity on the 65% figure that was quoted in the minutes of the last meeting. That obviously can happen on a shift basis. It's not an ongoing percentage that was quoted. The other element was seeking clarification from NHS Improvement at what point having services just run by locum consultants was deemed to be sustainable. I've obviously linked in with Dawn on this. We've not had a response from NHS Improvement to that, but there is a meeting tomorrow with Public Health Education England, the CCGs, around how we can ensure better allocation of junior doctors to the hospital to support their staffing needs.
Okay, thank you. The next action was Ms Clark to obtain a copy of SAF's business continuity plan and escalation plan and present it to the governing body meeting.
Yes, this wasn't quite ready to bring to public board, but we are discussing it in collaboration with SAF, and it's on CQRM following the Plan Care Working Group, so it will be available for the January meeting.
So it will come to the January board. Okay, thank you. And final action with regards to that meeting was to assist Councillor Shinton with regards to obtaining data relating to the reconfiguration, because obviously the wording's wrong in the paper.
Yes. So I have sent some information through. We're still working on that. It is a bit of a mystery, but we're making some progress, I think.
Thank you. And if we move on to the actions and matters arising from the extraordinary board meeting. There was only one, and that was for Mrs Vogler to resubmit the revised draft PCBC business case and document consultation documents to NHS England, and that's been done. So we can move on to the first paper in the section around clinical and financial sustainability, which is Mr Skidmore presenting about the progress report on our quality, innovation, productivity and prevention schemes, otherwise known as QUIP.
Thank you. I think first of all, just to say, spot the deliberate mistake as text on the front page, where under the key issues it notes a very small fall in forecast. I have to apologise, our edit failed to chop that out. What I am reporting as at month 7 is that QUIP delivery has deteriorated such that the forecast position at month 6, which was delivery of £15.96 million worth of savings, is now likely to be 14.98 million. What I did want to point out, and apologies here because this is quite a technical adjustment rather than it being just a simple explanation, it's usually the way, isn't it? Is that this is a deterioration in the reported delivery on the QUIP information, but that has not impacted on our I&E position, our accounts position. And the reason for that is that when we collect our information to go into the tables for QUIP, we collect our data from various sources and put them all together. When we generate our forecasts for the finance position, all of the data comes from one source. Now, what happened in our reporting between months 6 and 7 is that we had a double count in the QUIP table of some of our VBC and MSK activity. We've had lots of conversations about VBC and MSK in the past and the difficulties in extracting information about these. And what we were able to do is flush out that double count. So unfortunately, we do have a deterioration in the reported position, but I just wanted to make it absolutely clear that that was not a hit to I&E because we hadn't picked up that double count of savings in the I&E position. Balanced with that, though, I do think we need to look at some of the successes in our programme. We are still on track to deliver in excess of £3 million worth of savings through our prescribing schemes. And we're still also on track to deliver 4 or 5 million around our CHC schemes, which is down to the tremendous hard work of those teams. We've also got a number of large schemes in the pipeline that we're now looking forward to 18-19 across our broader portfolio that are anticipated to bring strong delivery in future years as well. One of the things that is picked up in the paper is a level of risk assessment on all of these schemes, and you know, I quite often say, don't I, that I'm paid to be the pessimist here. So whilst I look forward and I look at the forecasts and we try to extrapolate where we think our successes will land at the end of the year, I've also always got an eye on the risks that are inherent in that delivery. And I do think that probably the largest area of risk around those numbers is still within the CHC portfolio. So despite all the hard work and despite all the good things that are going on, I do think we have to have a level of realism about the pace at which we can deliver some of these savings. So whilst I think that the totality of the number is still there for us to go for, I do think that we need to be quite realistic about how quickly we'd be able to release some of the savings through the work that the teams are doing. We have, and we mentioned it as we went through the notes, we have put in some additional detail into the report this month, so there is actually a row-by-row account of each of the schemes that we've got. I'm hoping that that will provide more information really for governing body and will help with some of our discussions. And we will start to now bring through more information on the upcoming schemes. I'm conscious that we took those to our Finance and Performance Committee last week. But I think we need to start bringing that through here so there's visibility at governing body as well. I'll pause there and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, so, questions, Keith?
I think I'd just reflect on the discussions at the Finance Committee last week. I think one of the things that we focused on for quite a few months is about how we need to get better at planning and forecasting our quick delivery. And I think the point you raised about some of these schemes will deliver, but it's a question over what time period they'll deliver is a key issue, not just for this year, but also as you were reflecting in terms of how we plan for 2018-19 as well. I think the other thing that's a risk that the Finance Committee have discussed numerous times as well is how much of this is back-ended into the fourth quarter of the year. So the risk that you outline I would agree with, but it's also the nature of the fact we've got so much that's riding on being delivered in quarter four, and I think that's something we need to reflect on in terms of drawing up the plan for next year. It looks okay for the first 1 or 2 quarters, but then the pressure really starts to hit when we've got the biggest bulk that we're trying to achieve, and that's a real risk in itself.
I think some of that we have mitigated against already in the forecasts. So there were some quite heavy projections, particularly for VBC and MSK, which we're no longer reflecting. But there are elements of prescribing and CHC, just picking out the bigger numbers, that are back-ended by virtue of the fact that the projects are starting later. But as you say, that there's still that risk that even a week's delay can delay the savings.
Yeah, I think Sam would like to make a comment. I think Dawn's got a question.
I guess
Sam first.
the forecasting thing is a challenge, but it's also a challenge when so if I were to tell you the 14.98 is a net position, so we're still on target to hit our prescribing quip, despite the fact that we've had an in-year 1.8 million cost pressure due to no cheaper available stock. These are price rises agreed by NHS England that weren't known at the start of the year. That hadn't happened, of course, we would be presently delivering 16.8 million. So forecasting is difficult when you're playing on a pitch that at times has got moving goalposts. So I just think the team are doing very well. I just would like to back Claire's up so that there is no additional risk in this to quarter four at the moment. That has been mitigated out at the moment, but we're still pushing to deliver those benefits, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's just important to assure the board as well that although these significant savings have been made, they've been done with evidence-based practice and national frameworks. There's been no adverse impact on patients.
Thank you. Further questions? William.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question, a detail. What is the Monmouth scheme? It doesn't quite make sense to me on the list of QUIP initiatives.
Yeah, Monmouth is the name of a company, and that company came in and did a piece of work for us earlier in the year to give us examples of where we could challenge coding, counting anomalies in our data around the services that we commission from some of the trusts. Internally, Monmouth is the badge for coding and counting challenges, in effect, and that's a reflection of where we've been successful in putting some of those challenges back to the trusts and having the payments that we're making reduced, because we shouldn't have been charged for those items in the first place.
So is this the scheme? Back in August, we had a contract, a coding contract challenge, I think, with 2.1 million, which then the next month went down to 1 million. Now, is this the same initiative, which is now 500,000?
Yeah.
I'm just sort of flagging up the fact that obviously that initiative has moved significantly.
So there are still 1.3 million of contract challenges unresolved with SAF at the moment that we're working hard with the trust to do. Some of those seem to me to be very obvious, such as SAF charging us for diagnostics when actually they're in inpatient tariff. And some of these are hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. So there's still a lot outstanding to be agreed.
Thank you. I think we've got a question from Steve, and I'll...
Just, I suppose, when you, the question is around planning and forecasting. I mean, when you look at the breakdown, I mean, it's quite noticeable. It's the acute services which aren't delivering, and that's not for the first time when we've done QUIP. And there seem to be some lines in, I mean, like the contract and like the QUIP schemes within the community services, which are there and not going to deliver anything. And also looking at the graph and the forecasting, we were forecasting a much bigger improvement in Q4, which now seems to have disappeared and it's going to flat line. I just wondered why that is, if that could be explained.
Claire, I want to answer that. I'll also just remind people to put questions through the board, obviously for practice later on as well. So Claire.
Yeah.
The chair.
So there's in the shift in Q4 from the plan down to the actual level, quite a large chunk of that is down to VBC and MSK. So where those projects have slipped into next year, we were anticipating originally in the plan at the start of the year that would be happening in Q4. So that does make quite a significant difference to that back end and relates to the point that Keith was making, really. Yeah.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? If not, then we will note the contents of this report, and we can move on to the next item, which are two items from Julie, which are verbal updates. And the first one around sustainable neurology services.
Okay, with regard to neurology, I'm pleased to say that Shrewsbury and Telford hospitals have cleared their backlog. We're in discussions with the Trust at the moment regarding a phased reopening in January. We have requested a copy of a plan because at the moment they're still in discussions with the Walton Centre. They have a meeting with them on the 19th of December to discuss their subcontract arrangements, and we need to understand the impact that capacity will have during the first part of next year and how we phase that in. The last thing we would want to do is fully open services without the necessary capacity in the system locally and then create another backlog. So we're just working that through with the Trust at the moment, and what I would propose is that we'll bring the details of that phased plan through to January's governing body.
Okay, thank you. Questions about neurology? No. If not, then we'll note that and we'll move on to a verbal update around the child and adolescent mental health services.
Okay, we've had a statement back from the SSFT around the current provision of the new service for CAMHS, and there are some teething troubles with the introduction of that new contract. We had a very productive meeting, a clinical meeting last Thursday with the Trust that Shalendra attended on our behalf, and I'll ask him shortly to give a brief update on that. We have issued a contract performance notice against the Trust for the service. We have a formal contract meeting this afternoon to discuss the details of the issues and what will form the remedial action plan, and then the Trust have 5 working days after today to then submit that remedial action plan to us. So we're obviously expecting that next week, and then I will bring a report including the salient points of that action plan to January's governing body. But I've asked Shalendra to update on the meeting last Thursday, which I think was very positive.
Shalendra.
We had a meeting of all the commissioners for 0 to 25 services, and it was regarding prioritizing what we need to discuss with SSFT so we can move in the right direction to have positive outcomes. And common theme was that we need to support what's happening and continue to extract the best out of the circumstances. Towards the end, we identified that the communication was the biggest priority, and towards the end, we also had a telephone consultation with Dr. Gul Mohammed, who is a representative for 0 to 25 services, and he agreed to get involved in discussions on an ongoing basis. So we decided that we'll meet monthly and continue to have a dialogue and identify what are the further problems and rectify them with combined efforts. Also, he's agreed to go to all the stakeholders separately, meet them, discuss with them the priorities and rectify them rather than collecting them and bringing to CQRM, which is going to be larger trouble. So a very positive meeting it was.
Okay, thank you. Got questions? Dawn?
Just to add that to that, it's in the quality report, but the two directors of children's services from the council and ourselves with Telford CCG will be meeting before Christmas as well, just to look at any further action.
Okay, questions from the board? I mean, sorry, Tim.
Yeah, can I just support the view that communication is key here?
Yeah.
I have had quite a number of questions from practices about referral pathways. So I just wanted to pick up and support that view that Shalendra has raised and emphasise that we do need to not just give sort of a overview of things, but give practices perhaps a little bit more detail around the priorities. So if we can do that.
Thank you. Yeah, Shalendra?
To that question, we did raise this concern with Dr. Mohammed, and he's agreed to meet all the GPs in different locality meetings, and he's going to send some dates out so we can, in our local locality board meetings, bring him in, and he will discuss and identify what the issues are and try to rectify them, and there, if not, put a plan in.
I mean, I'd just like to, perhaps Julie can comment on this, but I mean, I think as a GP, we've actually seen an improvement in the service. Although there are challenges in the SSFT service that's being provided, we need to recognise from where we were to where we've got to. We've now got online access for the 0 to 25-year-olds through Cooth. We've got a drop-in centre both once a week in Shrewsbury and in Telford and Wrekin, where parents and children and adolescents can go themselves for sort of help. So they have shortened the waiting times, the waiting lists. So although there are challenges, I think we are moving forward, and I think our drive is to get as good a service as we possibly can, and we are short of that, but we are in a better place than we were. Would that be a fair interpretation?
Yes, I think so, and I think on a personal basis, having been dealing with this, I think the meeting last Thursday and that commitment from their clinical lead to meet directly with our localities and to work through those communication issues directly with GPs, I think is essential. I think it's been one of the things that's always been missing, and I think with that we can. I think not only will we help take the service forward, but I think it will just genuinely help that communication, that shared care between primary and the specialist trust, which I think is really positive.
Okay, thank you. Professor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. It builds on what you were saying, Julian. It is that aspect of, as well as communicating with the GPs, it would be helpful if we are making as much of that information about the alternatives available to parents and indeed schools, because of some of the joint concerns that are there.
Yeah, no, thank you. Unless there's any further comments, then we'll thank you for that verbal update, and we can move on to the presentation around the midwife-led unit. This presentation is going to be given by Jess Sokolov, who's our clinical lead for women's and children's, but also Fiona Ellis, who's our programme manager across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin for the local maternity service. And also we've got Faye Bailey, who's an independent midwife who's been supporting the CCG around not only this piece of work, but other work around maternity. So thank you very much. I think probably at the top here, I think would be better.
Sorry, we're just... Oh, no, it is working. There we are.
I think, Fiona, if you want to sit up here, then we can share the microphone afterwards and answer questions.
Okie doke. Hello, everybody. As Julian said, I'm Jessica Sokolov. I'm a GP based in North Shropshire. I am Deputy Chair of the CCG, and I've been clinical lead for this review. I'm not brilliant with technology. Okay, so what I want to do with this presentation is first of all give a reminder of the process we've been through in order to reach the point we're at. Then I'm going to go through our proposal in some detail. What I'm not going to do is go line by line through the process or line by line through the proposal, because you have it in the papers in front of you. This is a broad strokes overview, and once the presentation is finished there'll be time for questions. When it comes to questions, as we've said, we've got Faye Bailey, who's our expert midwife. She's worked with us to develop this proposal. She was recommended to us by NHS England, and we've got Fiona Ellis, who's our lead commissioner for Women's and Children's, and is also the lead for the local maternity system. So between the three of us, we hope to be able to answer any queries that you have. It's worth remembering why we actually did the review in the first place. The review started because we had concerns raised by two different quarters about the current system. We had members of the public turning up to our public board this time last year saying these units are being closed at extremely short notice, what's going on? We also had the Trust telling us that they couldn't staff the system as a whole, and they were having to use what they call their escalation policy, which is where they would draw midwives from the quieter units towards the busy consultant unit, where 85% of people in this area are actually having their babies at the moment. That was causing a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. The Trust were telling us that with their current system and with their staffing concerns, they weren't able to guarantee one-to-one care during labour for all the ladies who were delivering at the consultant unit, which is an unacceptable state of affairs. So that's why we started the review. The review breaks down broadly into three phases. So phase one is looking at existing information. Again, in your papers, it'll detail exactly what we looked at, but to give an outline, we're talking about things like demographic information about the size of our population, the prevalence of conditions that impact on risk in pregnancy, maternal outcomes, neonatal outcomes, and benchmarking those against national standards. Part of the benchmarking demonstrated that whilst 85% of our population are delivering in the consultant unit, that's actually in keeping with the situation in the country as a whole at the moment, where 87% of people are delivering in a consultant unit. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but it is a fact of the system at the moment that we have to be aware of. So we looked at the demographic detail. We looked at better births, of course we did. We looked at the recommendations in Better Birth, the aspirations in Better Birth, to look at how that compares to what we've got right now, but also to make sure that any changes or developments incorporated those ideals. We looked at activity data. How many babies are being born in Shropshire? Where are they being born? What kind of delivery is that? What kind of postnatal care is being delivered and where? We looked at staffing issues, sickness levels, recruitment issues, and we used the Birth Rate Plus data. Birth Rate Plus, for those who don't know, is a nationally recognised, accredited external tool, really, used to assess the need for midwife time versus the activity you've got. What that was showing, along with all the other data we had, is that there was a definite mismatch between where the midwives were and where the ladies were. It demonstrated that at the consultant unit there was a very definite shortfall of midwives for activity, whereas in the three smallest MLUs there was actually an excess of midwife time compared to what was actually happening there. We then moved on to phase two. Phase two was about gathering new information. Now again, you will remember that we commissioned ELC Works, which is an external organisation, to do a piece of engagement for us. What they did was start with some face-to-face interviews with service users and members of staff. In order to avoid it being a self-selecting group, we went out to where service users were accessing services, so scanning departments, antenatal departments, and spoke with them. Apparently you need about 50 of these questionnaires in order to have a valid group to get an idea of what's going on. We had 86 discussions with staff members from rural and urban settings. We had 132 discussions with service users, and 37 families also submitted free text evidence, so we've got a really robust evidence base. Again, there's a huge amount of detail which would take about 3 years to present, so I'm not going to do that. What I will do is tell you that what it did show very, very clearly is pressure in the consultant unit. Staff and service users alike were saying it feels pressured, it feels fast, it feels like I'm not given time to breathe, I'm not getting the attention that I need, I'm not getting that support with breastfeeding, I'm out. And the staff were saying it's just too busy, we're not able to give the care that we want to offer patients because there are too many of them compared to the staff that we have. So in phase 1, we've got demonstration of an activity to staffing mismatch. In phase 2, we've got evidence that that is impacting on patient experience and on staff experience, which means that we absolutely have to do something to address that. And again, coming back to that issue of one-to-one care in labour, as a doctor, I can't imagine there is anything that impacts more on safety than having one-to-one care at the point that you are delivering. It's not being guaranteed for 85% of our population. We need to do something different, which goes to phase 3. Phase 3 was the co-design workshops. Now, the idea of these was to get service users, interested members of the public and staff together and say, this is the situation we're in, this is where we want to be, what are the bold steps needed? And that was the question that was posed, is what are the bold steps needed to get us from A to B? And it is worth reflecting at this point that the public are not a single entity. And they don't think with one mind, and they don't speak with one voice, and a lot of different opinions were put forward. If I give an example, when we said we've got this mismatch, what are the bold steps that we need to take? One suggestion was reopen the MLUs. Now, we'll leave aside the fact that that doesn't answer any of the questions. That was one of the suggestions. Another suggestion was, I know what we need. This was a service user. I know what we need. We need one enormous, shiny, new midwife-led unit right next to the consultant unit, because then everyone can have their baby there and everyone can get help when they need it. Those are quite demonstrably polar opposites, but they both came from members of the public. It is clearly impossible to transcribe verbatim both of those into a service model and have that model make sense. But they both do contain important points. So we can't just have one alongside unit, because that's not offering all the different birthing options. And we want to offer all the different birthing options. In fact, we will. But it makes an important point about the opportunity of using the alongside unit differently to manage risk differently and improve the uptake of midwife-led care. So that goes in the model. Open the MLUs. Doesn't answer the staffing mismatch, doesn't address the issue of underlying clinical unsustainability, but what it does do is demonstrate very strongly that there is a need to have care, where possible, in people's communities. That's absolutely recognised, that's in the model. That's the way we use those workshops. The information that came out of them was then taken by Fiona and Faye and put into a proposal, which I'm about to go through. Also worth just highlighting, there was quite a lot of stuff discussed at these workshops which was really aspirational and really in keeping with better births, but does not fit neatly within the midwife-led unit part of the maternity system. Rather than lose that, that's going to go into the local maternity system, which is the vehicle for driving the recommendations of better births, and it will be taken forward there. Ooh, I didn't know it did that. Okay, so pregnancy. At least 5 maternity hubs around the county which are open for at least 12 hours a day, delivering planned midwife-led care. These hubs will need to be accessible by car and by public transport. You will also have access and support from a midwife 24/7 in an unplanned setting. So those situations where I'm not sure my baby's moving as much, I think I've had a little bit of bleeding, I don't know what's going on here, but I've got that funny headache. You've got access and support straight away, and that's either by phone, video call, or face-to-face. All 3 are included in the model. The other thing that's included in that is a really, really good triage system. What people are really worried about, one of the themes that came through very strongly, is people need to be reassured that they will get to their chosen place of delivery on time. And that's not unique to Shropshire. Every single person who's ever been pregnant has worried about being caught out on the side of the road. We don't want that to happen. With a good triage model that's extremely responsive, we can ensure that women know when it's time for them to set off and they can get there in good time. At these maternity hubs then, the planned care will be as listed here. So you've got your midwife care, you've got obstetrician appointments, you've got scanning, you've got CTG monitoring, which is where we put the monitors on your belly to check your baby's heartbeat and uterine contractions. You've got support with mental health issues, you've got support with long-term conditions that impact on pregnancy, like diabetes, for instance. Smoking cessation and weight management programs to help manage risk during pregnancy, information and advice about birth options, which is hugely important, and I'll come to that in a minute, and the opportunity for peer support. Now, one of the things to recognise in this is that actually at the moment, some of these are available in some areas and not in others. In this new proposal, this will be a standard offer throughout all the county. One of the things that's in this, which is really, really important, is that women will not be making a decision about where they plan to have their baby until later in pregnancy. At present, that decision is made at your booking appointment, essentially, which is at 10 weeks. So you don't quite know what your risks are really going to be. You don't know how you're going to feel in pregnancy, whether you're going to be one of these super women who marches through, whether you're going to be rubbish like me. You don't know, if you're a first-time mum particularly, you don't know where the units are, what they look like, what the feel of them is. You've not got confidence in your midwives yet because you've only met them for the first time at that point. It was a very strong theme that is not a good time to be making a decision, and people feel pressured into making a decision at that point. In our model, we will be deferring the point at which people make that decision, so they've got time to get acquainted with all their options first. And that links back to the importance of people having a say and feeling fully involved in decisions around their care. They haven't always. That absolutely has to change. Birth. So we'll be offering a full range of birth settings, which is your consultant unit at the PRH, a alongside unit, which will be at the PRH, a freestanding midwife-led unit at Shrewsbury, and then home birth around the county. The choice of birth settings also includes improving links with options outside of our county, because the world doesn't stop at the border. And we know, for instance, that a lot of people in the northwest will choose to deliver at the Wrexham Myler Hospital. The current situation is that that's a bit of a clunky process, it's a bit of a faff. We want to formalise those arrangements so that people can access not just consultant care out of county, but also midwife-led care out of county if that's more convenient and if that's their preference. Fiona's already started conversations with their hospitals about that, and that's going well. One of the aspirations in Better Births is to increase the number of midwife-led deliveries as opposed to consultant-led deliveries. Now, the reason for that is statistically, if you are a low-risk lady and everything goes swimmingly, you are more likely to have a good outcome, fewer interventions, if you're in a midwife-led setting than a consultant-led setting. You have to recognise, of course, that birth is unpredictable and nobody knows what's low risk until after the event, but that's the aspiration, that's what's included in Better Births. Now, in our proposal, there are a number of different actions we're taking that will help drive that. One of them is a long-term aim. Within the local maternity system, we're looking at all the public health interventions that will help reduce conditions that actually impact on your risk in pregnancy. So, in simple terms, if we have fewer obese people in the county, fewer people are hitting that threshold where they meet the risk, they meet a high risk need, and it opens up extra options to them. But that's a longer term aim. In the short term, the first thing we're doing is introducing an opt-out system. So the default, the business as usual will be that unless you are a high risk lady, there's a defined clinical need, or unless you specifically choose, then it will be midwife-led. That's the business as usual. As we've said, we're enabling women to get to know the midwives who are going to be looking after them, because that fosters confidence. You'll be deferring the point at which you make the decision, which enables people to make a more informed choice and understand access and availability, and have a look at the unit, see what they feel like, because that's important. The other, and which goes back to one of the points that was made by a service user in the workshops, is using the alongside midwifery-led unit differently. So at the moment, technically it is alongside because it's on the same site, but in reality, by the time you've run across the whole hospital site in order to get there, it's actually the doctors who need the oxygen. It doesn't work very well. What consultants have told us is that they would be willing to manage risk differently if it was more adjacent, so if it was actually just a lift up or a lift down and you were there in a minute. What service users told us in the workshops is that they would be more likely to choose a midwife-led delivery if they knew that should they need help, it's right next door. Now, that's not something that everybody's concerned about, but for those who are concerned about it, this is a way to improve uptake. So that's included in the proposal as well. Postnatally, again, you've got your hubs around the county offering planned care at least 12 hours a day. You've also got community midwife and women's support assistant response 24/7. So again, phone, video call, face-to-face. People did say that in this situation, sometimes what they need is a hand on the shoulder. That's in the proposal. One of the things about this that's really good and quite innovative is the idea of a day stay. So the hubs are open and you can come in for your appointment or you can drop in and stay for as long as you need to. The women's support assistants can help you practice a few feeds through the course of however many hours you choose to stay there. They can help you bath your baby, gain confidence. People said they sometimes need a bit of space to just reflect on birth, because even if it's a good experience, it's still a life-changing experience. That's built into this. There's also the opportunity here for peer support. If you're dropping in, if you're using this as a day space, then there will be other mums dropping in as well. They're likely to be at a similar kind of stage as you in your parenthood journey, and there's an opportunity to form peer support groups there, which again was something came out of the workshops as being very important to mums. These notes are at the end of each of the antenatal, birth and postnatal sections, but I'm just touching on them here. Recurring theme of using skill mix correctly. In this proposal, we are using the skill mix correctly. If a women's support assistant can help with breastfeeding advice and can help with gaining confidence and bathing baby and all the rest of it, that frees up midwife time to do midwife tasks, which means then women are getting more attention at the point that they need it. There was a strong theme of people not feeling that they really genuinely have a say in what's happening. There are a lot of different steps we need to take to make sure that that changes, but it absolutely has to change. Everybody's in charge of their own care and gets a say. This is 2017. We really do need to update the electronics, and that's in the proposal. And then people having a say about decisions in the service. The maternity voices work that sits with the local maternity system is going to continue. We've already had discussions with SATH about any future situation being delivered and developed with the staff at the front line rather than in a more closed doors environment. And they're very open to that. They see that as an opportunity to reset the situation within that department. This proposal then. The idea is that if you approve it today, we will double check that it doesn't need to go through the assurance process. We've had informal intimations that it probably doesn't, but we'll check that. We will then aim to go out to consultation so that any amendments or refinements that need making can be made. This proposal that's in front of you, it answers the question that we had to answer in the first place, which is we've got a staffing activity mismatch that impacts on patient experience, it impacts on staff experience, and potentially impacts on safety because of the one-to-one care in labour issue. That's dealt with here. There is no uncertainty about what's going to happen day to day because it's deliverable. This is sustainable, and that means that regardless of whether it's next week, next year, whenever, you know what services you can access because they're not going to be closed at short notice. There is a full range of birthing options, which is something that's only available in about 22% of trusts and boards in the country at the moment. That's blooming good. There is an aspiration to increase the uptake of midwife-led delivery. There is a comprehensive offer for antenatal care and postnatal care, which is standardised around the county. We've taken this proposal to Dennis Walsh, who's a nationally recognised expert in midwife-led care. We've asked him to read it through and then discussed it with him in detail. He is very positive about it. He feels it's fully in line with his own research and recommendations and with Better Births, which means that we can be very, very confident that this is a good proposal that addresses the needs of our population and is safe and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. We open up for discussion and questions from the board. If questions can come through me, I will work out which of our team panel of experts to direct questions to. I'll probably get it wrong. I'm assistant as chair. Graham.
Yes, can I just clarify a few points with Jess? Unfortunately, I didn't go to the second workshop. I went to the first one, which was very good. I was otherwise committed. It is a big document, and I've tried to browse through it. Could I just clarify? Am I right in there was 2,500 births in Shropshire last year? 2,490.
Should Jess?
That's the figure I picked out of here. Is that right?
Yes, 5,000 for the whole. Yeah, so 5,000 for the whole footprint, and then fewer for the Shropshire population.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a distinct figure in here. Of those, only 148 were rural MLU births. Very small number. And if we look at the different ones, Ludlow's been very vocal, 31 births in a year. Midwives, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 31 births, one birth about every 15 days. Doesn't sound logic to me. Do we know what percentage of the total births in the county came from the catchment area of the 3 MLUs?
Yes.
Sorry, yes, we do have that data. It is in there. I think it's in the phase 1 report, isn't it? We've got, I know that 73% of the people, for instance, registered to a South Shropshire practice actually delivered at the Princess Royal Hospital in Telford. But that breakdown is in the phase 1 report.
Sorry, Fiona just wants to clarify that.
Yeah, that information is in there. It's paragraph 316 on page 11.
Okay, I'm not surprised it's in there, but I'm sorry, it's a big document to keep up here. And of all those people then from that area who have travelled to predominantly Telford or here, have you had any major issues? Have you had births at the side of the road, or is transport not an issue?
Fiona, would you like to?
Our births, the term birth before arrival, where the definition is that there isn't a midwife, doctor or paramedic present, are in line with national standards. So the rate is about 0.5%. So in answer to your question, people travel safely to have their babies at Shrewsbury and Telford most of the time. Yeah.
And that's a lot, that's thousands. So another 150 travelling doesn't seem a big issue to me because they're low risk births anyway. One of the concerns, though, if you do close those hospitals, the mothers might choose to go to Telford or Shrewsbury. But what if they choose to have home births? What guarantee are we going to have that there will be adequate midwives available within easy reach, 24 hours a day? And if one goes off sick, you don't have to spread the load. They're going to be totally supported.
So I think that's a question around sort of the safe staffing levels, and I think if Faye would like to address that as a general point, really.
The model doesn't actually change the current midwifery staffing in the community. The community staffing at the moment is 24/7, and it will continue to be 24/7. The way the provider unit organises their community services, they propose to do it in 3 geographical areas, which will mean a maximum of a journey time for any midwife to get to somebody in a home confinement of about an hour, which is in line with the national time frame for arrival at home confinement.
And Faye, can we just clarify that model has changed recently, hasn't it? In terms of the hour requirement, the SAF shortened the time from 2 hours to 1 hour, haven't they?
Yeah, there was some staffing concerns raised by the midwives that it was taking longer than they wanted to get to a home confinement. So SAF met the community midwives, listened to the concerns and reorganised their staffing to allow that minimum standard to be met.
That's interesting. That's not what you read in the paper, unfortunately. So that is my last question. There have been instances reported in the last 6 months of midwives not getting there in time for births. Some of those births went straight forward and being delivered by the husband with cords. That isn't acceptable, and if more mothers choose to have their babies at home, the current system, from where I sit logically, does not really offer the level of safety I would expect if it was my wife 50 years ago.
Can I just ask Faye to answer that around safety? Because I think we have to remember that giving birth, you can't plan, whether a thing, you can triage and assess whether deliveries are safe, low risk, high risk, but in fact in reality until it happens, I've said a number of times I was born at home with a birth before arrival with a cord behind my neck, and it does happen, you can't plan for these things. So I think if Faye would like to comment just around the safety of the model.
No, I recognise that, but you'll always get the odd one like that.
Should we just let Faye comment on that?
I think there's 2 things that you've asked there. If it's a planned home confinement, the mother would be given a set of instructions about how to contact a community midwife, when to phone, what would be expected. So there's a whole range of things that would be discussed with the mother. And born before arrival is a slightly different thing. It's normally caused by the mother having a precipitate labour, which is a labour that is actually an awful lot quicker than expected. And in circumstances like that, she would phone into the triage and they would send for a 999 ambulance or send a community midwife. Either way, born before arrivals happen across the country every day. You can't legislate for how quickly a birth is going to take place, so we minimise that risk with good triage and a good ambulance service and a good 24-hour community midwifery service. And this model offers all of those options.
Okay, thank you. Keith.
Thank you. I like the proposals that are in the document, Jess. I don't know if the question's through the chair, but I'll just give you that feedback anyway. I do like the fact it seems to make the best use of the staff and the range of community-based services that are provided. But I just wonder if you could tell me a bit more about how you've balanced the safety and rural access issues through the review process.
Jess, you want to start and then Faye may be able to fill in if there's anything to add?
Yeah, so I mean, clearly we live in a rural county. We have to bear in mind that people need to be able to access services in their community where at all possible. We do have to, though, have safety as the number one priority. That's absolute. And what we've done in this is, first of all, address the safety issues that exist around the current situation with regard to that lack of one-to-one care for the majority of people who are delivering. We've looked at, when people raise concerns, we do take them seriously. So when it comes to things like the on-call responsiveness, that's been changed as of the beginning of December because we've had discussions with the Trust about it. When it comes to concerns about BBAs, those have been looked at. We've asked Faye as an expert midwife to look at them specifically to understand. The bottom line is that we are in a difficult situation. Better Births is quite clear that we can't have obstetric units in every market town. It's neither practical nor desirable to do that. And therefore, wherever you live in the county, in the country rather, there will be people who have to travel a bit further in order to access all the birthing options. That's the nature of the system. As to the safety of that and how we balance it all together, yes, I'll defer to Fiona and Faye.
Thanks. Yeah, in response to that question, I think just bringing in one of the items contained within Better Births, where within Better Births it said that through the research they undertook, there was much agreement that localising where possible and centralising where necessary was required so that services are as accessible to as many people as possible, but also safe and sustainable. And that's absolutely a principle that is embedded throughout this proposed model. So as Jess has said, safety has been paramount in the proposals that we've developed, but also rural access has been improved. So you'll note from not only have we got consistency in service across the county, there are additional services also now available closer to home for women, which will mean that whilst some women may have to travel further than they would under the current model in order to deliver their baby, during their antenatal period and postnatal period, they'll have more services available closer to home throughout that experience. So they will have their planned antenatal and postnatal care, as well as obstetric clinics, perinatal mental health services, peer support, public health services, a breadth of service, all delivered from the maternity hubs that aren't currently there. So through the proposed model, the safety has been improved and has been a key element of that, and also rural access has been improved also.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions from the board? Professor Thompson, Rod.
Thank you. I welcome the proposal saying that there will be at least 5 centres, and I recognise that the model also tries to ensure that there are those services that are available 12 hours a day at least. The northeastern area of the county is one of the areas that hasn't traditionally had access to those services. What thought is being given to that? And perhaps a question for Dawn. In the discussions that you are looking to have with directors of children's services, what discussion are you having in relation to potentially matching up some of the other support services, such as children's services, to get a better prenatal and postnatal support?
Actually, I think Fiona's probably can answer that question as well. So, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Rod, you'll note that in the options we have considered having more than 5 hubs across the county. Working with Faye to draw on her expertise around this, we've gone with the preferred option for at least 5 because we want the key thing needs to be that women need to rely on these services. These need to be services that are reliable and sustainable, that women know will be open when they need to access them. So we're looking at least 5 across the area. In terms of your comment in relation to children's services, I'm working closely with colleagues at Shropshire Council in relation to the early help hubs in order to ensure that we can really have these delivered as one service so that people can access these services in relation to early help, early years, as well as maternity. So yes, we're already working closely with the council on that.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that, yes, we would absolutely consider the alignment of all of this with other services within children's, but also the transitional planning as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Finola.
Yeah, just a point to say again, I like Board really welcome the model and see it as an enormous opportunity to really embed sort of antenatal and postnatal care in the community, bearing in mind that it's not just about the location of the birth. This is a journey for mothers that goes on for months, both even before conception and long after. And I see this as a massive opportunity to ensure those services in the community are aligned wherever they end up being in these hubs. But I think primary care is something that could also be aligned with them and helps to sort of provide those invisible threads of care and support that often aren't seen but are clearly very important to patients and those who are offering them care. My question is just around these maternity or midwifery support workers, not something I came across when I was having my children in Shropshire. Obviously, we're all having to think differently about how we work, but how quickly can these this type of individual be grown and offered to Shropshire? It sounds like we have some already, but obviously we need to grow more for this model.
Okay, Fiona. Oh, sorry, Faye.
Thank you for the question. I think support workers, maternity support workers are, as you've said, well embedded in secondary care. And it's quite innovative to actually see them being taken from secondary care and working in the community. They tend to be women who are wanting to work with other women. They're very attractive jobs and they're very, very easily filled when advertised. They will come into the service and depending on what the model is within the provider unit, they'll either have some on-site training before they go out to work with the midwives in the wards or in the community, or they'll work alongside the midwife and be trained on the job. They'll then do NVQ training and support worker training. So there's all sorts of opportunities. It's a really good job for the local community. It's often women who have experienced childbirth before and bring some of their own wealth of knowledge of family life to the job, and they often stay in it for a very long time. So it's all round, it's a really good thing for the profession and for women and for the jobs for local women.
Thank you. Any further questions from the board? Meredith.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've got 3 questions. They're similar but different. The first point I'd just like to make is the model, having looked at it carefully and discussed it in some detail, comes across as being much more accessible and equitable than the current arrangement. So that's a very positive movement forward. The first question, though, is about the range of views that were derived. Now, I heard the numbers that Jess talked about, the numbers of people involved and the questionnaires and so forth. But it's always very easy to seek the views of people who are very keen to come forward with their views. And I'd be interested to know how many views, how confident you were in getting views from people who aren't used to coming forward and giving their views for a range of reasons. So it's more a question of kind of the diversity of input. How confident are you about that?
If we deal with that first question, it's Fiona.
Thank you. Yeah, Jess briefly touched on it in her presentation, and in gathering the views in phase 2, we actually, or the people undertaking those in-depth interviews went to where women would be anyway. So that was to antenatal clinics where women would be getting their routine care, and other sites where maternity care is delivered. So that's how we've got in a range of opinions from those who are not necessarily normally proactive in sharing their thoughts.
Meredith.
Thank you. Thank you. I've heard from one or two people that there's a bit of anxiety that views were put forward and you haven't taken them into account. How confident are you that you have been able to address the views that you've heard from that wide range of sources?
Fiona again.
Very confident that we've taken account of everybody's views. Again, as Jess highlighted in the presentation, this review has undertaken 3 phases. So what we've done is taken on board the views that were gathered from staff, from women and others during phase 2 and phase 3, and taken those alongside the findings of phase 1, which looked at existing information around demographics, activity, national guidance, etc. So yes, confident that we've taken on board everybody's views and built them in where we can.
Okay, so just a supplementary on that. So there will have been some views that you haven't been able to include in your model. Is that right, do you think?
Yes, there may be some views that are expressed, as Jess said again, clearly everybody's representing their own individual views as part of that engagement, so it wouldn't be possible to take account of everybody's individual viewpoint, but what we've done is looked at themes and trends from that engagement work and built those in where it's appropriate to do so. And if people have got any concerns about points they feel were raised that haven't been addressed, more than happy to take those, but also would like to point out that if anyone wants more information on this, it's all available online on the Shropshire CCG website with much more detail about the views that were gathered and how we've responded to them.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you. One more point, yeah. Just wonder if you can tell us a bit more about the plans for further consultation on this exercise.
Fiona.
I think we'll be taking advice, Jess said, from NHS England about the depth of it, but I think at the moment the proposals are broad principles about what we want the model to deliver. What we'll do through the consultation is to gather feedback on how this should be delivered, what the nuts and bolts are going to be in terms of the detail of the service model.
Sam, did you want to add some information to that?
The plan will be to, as you will see here, the model is not fully developed in a number of areas, and the reason for that is that we would look to see that fully developed through consultation, as well as receiving feedback on any alternative models that people might feel are appropriate. So we're likely to consult probably for between 8 and 10 weeks on the process, a date for which needs to be finalised. This obviously proposal will need to go to the Telford and Wrekin CCG board in January as well, and then be taken from there.
Okay, thank you. Steve.
Thank you. As a GP who's previously been involved in supporting a midwifery-led unit, I'd first of all like to say I think this is at this stage is a very comprehensive bit of work, and the proposed model appears to be a very sound one. I have some question, or a question, around the option appraisal. Certainly in the papers you appear to have done an appraisal which is around sustainability and efficiency and has answered those questions. And questions have already been asked around safety and access. I just wondered whether any work had been done around outcomes, because I think that is certainly of interest to people, and if that hasn't been done, whether it will be done as we work this up.
Okay, thank you, Fiona.
Absolutely, we want the new model to be absolutely focused on outcomes. Another thing that was recognised through the findings of the review, not only from phase 1, but also from the feedback from staff and families, is that at the moment we measure services very much on input and activity, and that doesn't necessarily demonstrate positive impact for women and their families. So absolutely the new model will be centred around outcomes and ensure the delivery of that. And what we hope to do through the design of this model is that services can be flexible. So in focusing on the outcomes and less so on a rigid nature of buildings, etc., what we can do is ensure that services flex and respond accordingly to the demands of each and activity within each of the local areas to ensure that those outcomes continue to be met. So we'd want it to be a flexible model that can be centred around outcomes rather than specifics around activity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
William.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, there's the comment here that in the findings one of the findings was that staff morale is low, and obviously some of that can be attributed to the current maternity arrangements within the trust and the complexities around that. But it appeared to be some broader issues, and just wanted some assurance that that had been fed back to the trust as the employer, the SAF as the employer of those staff, because obviously staff morale does have an impact on the quality of delivery of service.
Should I ask Jess to answer that?
Yeah, it absolutely does. There's a huge amount of very strong evidence that staff engagement and empowerment impacts massively on the quality of services that are offered. So you're absolutely right. And it was a really strong theme. It was such a strong theme that came out that actually before we'd reached the end of the review or made any kind of proposal, we'd had an agreement at the programme board that we had to feed this back to the trust. So I had a meeting with Deirdre Fowler, who's the Director of Nursing, and with the Head of Midwifery. We handed over all the information that we'd had, all the engagement stuff, the tools we'd used as well, so they've got something to work with in future to see how things have improved. Their Head of Workforce was there as well, and we have asked them to, consider this. They are very aware that they're not in a good place either. This is a department that's working under extreme pressure and extreme scrutiny at the moment. You're right that has an impact, but we're quite clear that both the model and the uncertainty in the current model and the way that that's been handled have had an impact on staff feeling happy in their work, and we've fed that back so that they can act on it.
Okay. Julian, can I just add to that? Sorry.
Yes.
Just to also add to that as well as the specific response in relation to this review, as part of the broader local maternity system, there's a work stream that concentrates on workforce, and through the work of that work stream, we'll be looking specifically about how we can improve the support for staff across the maternity workforce, and also improve training and the well-being of staff across the piece. So it'll be taken further through the LMS.
I've got a quick question, really. In terms of we've talked a lot about quality and safety of service. Looking at the midwife-led units, there's the number of births, 31 in Ludlow, 16, 17, 15 in Ulster Street, 67 in Bridgnorth. Is there, from the research you've done, any level which is not ideal to go below for a freestanding maternity unit in terms both of maintaining midwives' personal skills and also the optimal number for running a unit?
Do you want me to?
Sorry, Fiona.
Do you want me to take it? I mean, certainly in my conversations with Dennis Walsh, who's a professor in midwifery around this, through his research, it suggests that where there's fewer than 250 births a year in a unit, that means that it's difficult to make them sustainable. However, there aren't many MLUs in the country that have more than 250 births. So we would want to have, we're not going to get up to that figure, but by reducing the number of places where births take place, it really helps to ensure sustainability around that.
Okay, Jess, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, no, I think following on from what Fiona said, obviously one of the aspirations is to increase the uptake of midwifery-led deliveries now. We know that simply having a lot of midwife-led units does not lead to a lot of midwife-led deliveries, because we've got a lot of midwife-led units and we don't have a lot of midwife-led deliveries. They need to actually be attractive options. There is that 250 per year viability threshold, which, as Fiona says, is not met by a lot in the country, but realistically, if we put the three smaller ones together, we're still not meeting that threshold. We do need to look at different ways of making midwife-led delivery attractive. That's contained within the model. It's about using the alongside unit in a different way to manage risk differently. It's about making those decisions later in pregnancy so you've got confidence about what you're choosing. It's about making it business as usual for low-risk ladies to have that option and to be encouraged to go for midwife-led care. There's a lot in this that meets that aspiration, but simply having a lot of different places where you can have it does not meet that criteria, and it does not fit the viability threshold.
Any further questions from the board prior to opening it up to public questions? Graham?
Just one quickie. Have the ambulance service been involved in any of this? Because it's all right saying we will send an ambulance. We know how bad they are down in the rural areas now. It might be quicker to have a flying midwife to get them there rather than wait on an ambulance. In brackets.
Yes, Fiona.
Have they been involved?
Yeah, I don't know whether Jess has been more involved in this than me.
Yeah, so one of the things, when people raise concerns, as I've said, we take them seriously. We asked Faye to look at on-call responsiveness, one of the recommendations she came up with is using a standard operating procedure with the ambulance service of kind of scoop and run for these precipitate deliveries. And Dawn's already started conversations with the ambulance service about that to try and get that embedded.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to open it up to questions from the floor, just purely about the midwife-led unit paper, because then we'll then come back to the decision on that of the board. We'll have questions on all other items at the end. Mr. Pickerton?
The ambulance service. In the past 4 years, you cannot get them to meet their target times. You know, and talk to the last 4 years, and they still can't.
So is this a question about the midwife-led unit paper?
Yeah, and if you could only have 2 centres where there's going to be births, what guarantee have you got that the ambulances will be able to meet the requirements?
Okay, Jess,
they can't meet their
I think we just touched upon ambulance, if you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, so first of all, there's no reason to suppose there will be an increase in precipitate deliveries because we're changing the model. We're talking about a very small number of people who currently choose to use these rural midwife-led units to deliver, and the majority of those are not precipitate deliveries. For precipitate deliveries, as we've said, we're already in the process of arranging a standard operating procedure, scoop and run procedure for the ambulance service, which is in place in other areas of the country and which Faye, as an expert midwife, has seen work well elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. David Sambach.
On the hubs, it says at least, and we've already heard from Dr. Thompson that, you know, maybe there should be a hub up in the northeast. I actually think the hubs need to be sited as close as possible to the most deprived areas, because the ladies in those deprived areas are probably more at risk because of their socio-economic background than they are in other parts of the county. So I think I will be writing as part of the consultation suggesting that you really do need to figure out where these hubs are going to be. And in my opinion, they need to be in working class areas near the poorest mothers.
I think that's a very good question. The question there is around how will we do an option appraisal about where the community hub should be situated?
So
Yes.
what we've said in the most recent programme board was that we want at least 5. You're right, the North East at the moment is underserved in the proposal as it stands. We recognise that it would be optimal to have something there as well. The difficulty is balancing what we can offer with the staffing situation and making sure that everybody's got absolutely equal access, because whilst we are working very hard to improve equity, and this does improve equity, we do have to recognise that if we build in a model that has staffing stretch, things are going to close at various times, and we don't want that. So we've got to balance those two. With regards to where the hubs actually go, what we said at the last programme board was they need to be accessible by car, they need to be accessible by public transport, and we need really to do some form of needs assessment to see where they should sit, to make sure that we're dealing with need in the population. So that's something that is yet to be fully worked up. That's part of the process that has to be gone through. But you're right that we need to reflect the need of a population.
Okay, thank you. Jill George.
Yeah, I'll rattle through a few if I may, because the...
Can we take the questions one at a time? Just if we can have one question, then an answer, and then I can appreciate you may have a few questions.
Okay, I mean, the concerns are, of course, on safety and access for rural areas. So, I mean, the first one is, will governing body members remember that this is primarily about taking away 24/7 access to maternity care in Ludlow, Bridgnorth and Oswestry, and especially taking away access to local births, which is where access and timely access really, really matters. And that's why women in those communities are so very scared and angry.
Thank you. I think we'll answer that. I think that's been covered in this bit. We'll reiterate again our views and answers around that, because I think we may have a slightly different view on that.
We are not taking away local access to births. Home birth is available around the county. There is no demonstrable difference in the support offered between a freestanding midwife-led unit birth and a home birth. Faye, as an expert midwife, can support that. The drugs that are available, the midwifery team that's available, and what you do if something goes wrong is exactly the same in both situations, and that is not being removed. This is not about taking care away from 3 communities. This is about improving care throughout the county and recognising that at the moment, the vast majority of people, when they access care, either antenatally or during labour are not getting an equal bite of the cherry, and they are not getting a guarantee of one-to-one care in delivery. That is really, really important, Jill. As a doctor, I cannot sit on something that does not offer that, because it massively impacts on safety, much more than anything you have highlighted so far.
Yes, your second question.
You will probably know, but I hope the governing body is aware that home births are actually more risky for babies where a woman is having her first time birth, not for subsequent births, but for first births. Home births are substantially more risky, and that is shown by the birthplace study. You will know that, Jess. Don't say they're the same.
So can I just ask Faye to answer that particular question around the safety and risk for first-time mothers having their babies at home?
All births carry risk, and it's about risk assessment, and it's about ensuring that the mother knows what's available when she has made the choice of where she's delivering her baby. So a home birth, as Jess has said, a home birth and a midwife standalone unit birth is exactly the same. It's only the only difference, and I mean the only difference, is who clears up after the delivery.
Thank you very much. It's really good, Jill, you're keeping your questions short and sharp. The next one.
Well, that's not what the birthplace research says, but let's park that. Is the governing body aware that there are obviously alternative models of MLU care? The 250 threshold is a bit wacky, but Powys, just across the border, functions with a very extensive unit of extremely small MLUs, with the number of births per year going down as low as 6. What consideration was given to that model? Because heavy hints were being dropped early in the process that that was what you were going to go for.
Okay, thank you. Fiona, would you like to answer that question around the whether we consider the Powys model, or is Jess answering it?
Well, I'll start and then I'll defer to Fiona. Actually, the only people who said we were considering the Powys model were you. We never said we were considering the Powys.
And Simon Freeman and a number of other board members.
Can we answer the question?
We
It's not a
didn't.
discussion, it's a question.
We know that in the Powys model, although they've got this system, they're seeing a reduction in midwife-led deliveries. It's not necessarily a system that works particularly well. We have to look at what's going to work for our county. We have to look at using getting best use of resources. And actually, we do also have to balance risk, because again, it's not possible to be absolutely definitive about any of this because labour is so unpredictable. But a situation where there are only 6 deliveries in a year is going to be one where that's a pretty unusual event. That's not necessarily something that's going to instill a lot of confidence in people choosing, and that may be why the Powys model is seeing a reduction in deliveries. But I'll let Fiona answer.
Okay. Fiona?
Yeah, I think it was in relation to Powys. I think it's they're seeing an increase in sort of the home birth rather than midwife-led unit birth. We did look at lots of different models of delivery across the country, including the Powys model. And this model is based on what we feel is best for our population. We are not Powys, we are Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. And this is the model that we feel is best for our community, having looked at a number of different options of service delivery across the country.
Okay, thank you. Jill, a fourth question?
Yeah.
Question 4.
Women obviously share the concerns about uncertain service delivery and about a lack of one-to-one care. But actually, will the governing body please remember when it takes its decision where those problems have come from, which is a policy by South of reducing the number of midwives it's employed and reducing contracts from whole-time to part-time from 2015 onwards at the obstetric unit. And although South has recently recruited more midwives, they have still not allocated a budget to recruit to birth rate plus recommended levels. And will the CCG consider perhaps South should employ enough midwives to meet the needs of women in rural areas and urban centres, rather than simply closing down births in rural towns?
That's a question around midwife numbers and employment in South and in the communities. Perhaps if Faye could answer that.
The model is recommending that we move the midwives to where the work is, which allows the recommendations from Better Birth Rate Plus, the manpower exercise that Jess referred to in her presentation, to be met. that in turn will allow the provider unit to recruit where they require the midwives to work.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a fifth question? Is that a fifth
I
and final,
do, I'm
or
afraid. I mean, the answer,
how many more do you have?
there,
Just so I can plan?
a few, and I will rattle through them quickly.
Because obviously we have Mr. Dees wants to ask a question. We've got 3 minutes left.
It is disappointing. If you'd let me rattle through a few all at once, it might speed things
Well, no,
up.
it doesn't, because I have to break them down and ask people to answer them.
With respect, Julian, are not remotely answering the questions, and what we've just been told is completely at odds
Would
with
you like
what
to
Sarah
ask? If
Jameson
you'd like to ask
said.
more questions, that's fine.
Indeed. Will the governing body please recall the 4 BBAs that have taken place in very recent months in Ludlow, an extremely unusual cluster, and will the governing body please familiarise themselves with the stories of those mothers, the mum left so distraught by her experience of giving birth without a midwife that she won't have any more children, and the mum who's talked about watching her newborn's chest rising and falling and praying with all her heart that her baby would keep breathing in the hour plus that she was waiting for the midwife to arrive.
Thank you. If I asked Dawn just to ask a question around the report of the birth force arrival, I think we've touched on it already about the changes they've made to the system, but perhaps Dawn and then Faye would like to comment.
We look into all such incidents very carefully, and this was an area that we asked Faye as expert midwife to look at the statistics, but also the individual births. Obviously, we can't discuss individual cases here, but perhaps Faye could give an update on the actual review.
I've looked at all the BBAs that have happened within the last year. I've compared those numbers with the previous 3 years of born before arrivals within Shropshire, Wrekin and Telford, and there is no difference year on year. The numbers are basically the same. On average, there is about 1 to 3 BBAs per month in this region, and that's in line with the national statistic of 0.5% that Fiona quoted earlier. Since I've then looked at, is there an increase in BBAs in the areas where we have recently closed the MLUs, and no, there is not.
Thank you. We do have 2 more people waiting to ask questions, Mr. Dees and the lady to
I will be very brief. Has Simon shared with governing body members the letters from 2 national leaders in the maternity world raising serious concerns about the Trust's proposals, concerns that they don't meet the requirements of better births to promote MLU deliveries, and concerns around the safety of the proposals, given the distance women will have to travel?
Thank you for that. I'll ask Simon now.
So the answers to those letters have been compiled, or currently being compiled, between Jess and Fiona and I, and the answers will be circulated with the letters to board members.
Okay. Thank you.
Disappointing they were not circulated so governing body members could read them before voting. I have copies on me that I'd be delighted to circulate if the Chair gave me permission to do that.
I should make a point, of course, that nobody's making a decision today, and any recommended or preferred option would be subject to public consultation and then a further decision by both governing bodies.
Okay, so we need to move on.
Final question. Are you confident, each and every one of you here, are you confident that the proposals have been rural-proofed? Because the voices of women in rural areas, as far as those women are concerned, are not being heard.
Thank you. I'll ask Jess to answer that question, and then Fiona may want to answer about the process, but we have touched upon engagement questions. Then we've got Mr. Dees and the lady on the...
We have discussed the engagement that we've undertaken. We have also reflected on the fact that 73% of patients who are registered with a South Shropshire GP actually deliver in Telford. Although people say that they want these services, there are very few who are actually accessing them at the moment. And it's important to reflect again, Jill, that actually there is no one voice of the people. There are a lot of different views. They have all been heard, but there are a lot of different views.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And MLU are told by staff consultants that they're not.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Dees, final question. Question from yourself, sorry, not a final question.
No, okay. Thank you, Chair.
First question.
I'd like to come back to this issue of sustainability, and I have 3 points, which I, with your permission, I'll make as a group, although they will need to be addressed differently.
One question with 3 points.
Okay, yes.
That's okay. One question at a time.
Clearly, sustainability in the long term is important. Young people making decisions about whether to move or remain in Shropshire to have their family, even 5 years out, want to know how this system is going to work and be satisfied that it is satisfactory. So the first question, you will be aware that Shropshire Council is presently consulting on its local plan, which describes the limits to house building out to 2036, I believe. It's a 20-year plan. I see no evidence that those population increases have been considered by the birth rate plus analysis and whether they would in any way affect the result. I think that should be done.
Can I say that does sound like a question, so if I...
It does rather, doesn't it?
Yep, the proposed or the anticipated population increases have been considered in our proposals. You'll see in the phase 1 information that there was an in-depth public health report that was produced that takes account of the anticipated increase in population levels and the impact that may have on numbers of women delivering. We've taken account of that in developing the model.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Point 2, I'm struggling to understand the financial sustainability. In the early part of the report, the first section, if I can call it that, there is reference to a 1 million over-support by the trusts to the costs of this MLU services. Yet if you look at the real report, the third section of this pack, tables 342 and tables 347, where activity and tariff data are put together, suggests that in fact there is a 30k underspend against the whole tariff available, and that in fact, disturbingly from a clinical point of view, significant underspend takes place in that tariff allocated to complex births. Now, unless my spreadsheet works differently to everybody else's.
Well, Simon's the...
So SAT are saying to us there's £1 million shortfall in tariff income. They have not been able to demonstrate that to us, and we have not conducted this review or indeed costed the new model with that in mind at all.
I understand.
So you know, our position is we pay tariff for maternity services. There are some areas in the country where CCGs, such as Cumbria, where they meet the rurality issue, are required to pay a rural premium on certain tariffs. That is not the case for Shropshire. It does not meet those requirements nationally.
Okay, thank you.
Third point. I will just comment very quickly with you. Thank you, Chair, but that doesn't address the question. This report appears to be internally inconsistent in terms of the way it deals with tariff and, as I said before, this apparent significant underspend for the most complex births. My third point is, noting David's comments about deprived areas, a man from Mars looking at this report has difficulty seeing that Telford is on the same planet as the rest of the county in terms of delivery risk to mothers. It seems to me wise, and again absent from the consideration, that something has to be done about Telford and the population's approach to preparing itself to be mums. It's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that should be in this document, not relying on, I presume, social prescribing to correct this problem.
No, nobody's relying on social prescribing to correct that problem. Yes. There is clearly a difference between outcomes between Telford and Shropshire. That's demonstrated. The local maternity system, which is this vehicle for driving improvement in maternal outcomes and neonatal outcomes and better births, sits on the STP footprint. So it covers Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin. And it's that place where work on public health interventions to improve outcomes can be done, because the majority of the difference comes from the health of the population to begin with. It comes from things that are impacted mainly by public health. So it's important, it's recognised, it needs to happen. It doesn't sit completely within this review, although the stuff impacts upon it. It sits within the local maternity system, and Fiona's leading on that for us.
Thank you. We do need to move on, so we've got one final question, and then we'll come back to the board decision.
I just wanted to ask a question about the present circumstances with the closure of the...
Well, no, this is about the current, this is about the plan. So this is questions about this plan. You could ask that question at the end, because that's about a current performance issue. They're two separate issues.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So we come back to the board, and we were asked to note the review findings for a proposed service model. It's fine. And then approve the proposed service model to move forward to the next stages. So can I just check that everyone in the voting members of the board approve that? Yeah. I'd then like to suggest that, partly because everyone's a bit cold, I noticed Jess and Joe have got their coats on, that we have a break for 5 to 10 minutes, and we can sort out the heating. Everyone can have a break, and I can do what middle-aged men in Shropshire need to do, and that's go and sort out my extra tickets for the West Ham Shrewsbury game. So if we reconvene in sort of 10 minutes' time. Thank you. If we can take our seats and move on with the meeting after that enforced break, and just to reassure members of the public, I have sorted my extra tickets out for the West Ham Shrewsbury game.
That's a big relief to everyone.
If we can then move on to the first report is the corporate performance report, and the first one is the financial report by Claire.
So the report that we have in front of us is our month 7 update. The request from last meeting to include a kind of best, worst, most likely case in here is work in progress, but you will see that on page 3 what we're now doing is setting our residual risk alongside our outturn reported, so that the governing body can see very clearly the extent of the position that we have. So I'm hoping that that's helpful, and then we'll develop presentation as we go. Governing body members will note that since month 6 we are still reporting to meet our 19.4 million deficit target for the year. However, what we have seen is a deterioration in the level of unmitigated risk. So what that means is we think that there are risks within the system at the moment that we do not have sufficient actions or reserves to cover those risks if they manifest. At month 6 we had made an assessment based on the information that we had that level of risk was around 3 million, that unmitigated element. For month 7 we've uprated that to £5 million. What I wanted to do is just take the opportunity to remind the governing body of some of the fairly scalable things that have impacted on our position this year, that have helped to drive the position that we're in. So we have an impact, an underlying impact in our budgets at the moment around HRG4+, which was the new pricing model for activity for contracts this year. In the allocation adjustments that were given out nationally for HRG4+, this CCG actually had allocation removed, not added, and that was to the tune of some £1.4 million. Now, all things being equal, we're running some modelling at the moment. We don't even think that we have a sort of standstill position on this. We do think that HRG4+ and the impact of that and the coding surrounding it is actually an additional cost pressure to us. So not only have we had to find cover for the 1.4 million allocation reduction, we do think there are additional costs on top of that which are manifesting in the position and causing some of these pressures that we have. We also have some in-year spend scenarios that one could argue we could not have foreseen. So again, a national mandate around sepsis charges, and potentially there are additional costs of sepsis that, and as I say, this is at national level at the moment. There's a query as to whether there should actually be a year's shadow period before the charges actually take effect. So if it is ruled that the shadow period should not happen, then actually there will be an increase in cost to the CCG, which is, at the moment, our estimates suggest that sepsis costs around £1 million a year for us, just in terms of the additional coding. We have extra pressure in the system this year, driven by the monies that we are giving to Shropshire, our out-of-hours provider, and current estimates for that are in the region of £800,000 in total for the year. And we also have some cost pressures within our running costs, which are as a result of the large-scale change that this organisation has had with its staffing base. So over a period of time, we have had a new executive team come in. There has been a requirement for interims, which obviously are covering vacant posts, but an interim cost is greater than that of a substantive post. And we also have a cost associated with the transition of services with our CSU provider, our corporate services provider. So we have changed the way in which we use the CSU services this year and in-housed quite a number of our teams, and that transition has taken some time, to be honest, but that will give us a non-recurring cost in this year, because obviously we've had to pay at the old levels until the transition occurs, but actually recurringly from April the 1st next year we will have rebased our contract to the level that we planned for. All of those items are very difficult to manage when you can't kind of see them coming. Set that alongside all of the other issues that we manage on a day-to-day basis, managing the activity in our contracts, then obviously it's no surprise in some respect that we are experiencing some significant challenges. The management team at the moment are working hard to reduce that unmitigated risk figure. I spoke at quite some length at our finance committee recently about some of the actions that we're taking and the delightful weekly meetings that we're having to make sure that the pace of change and recovery is as good as it can be. And I think just to finish off my comments, then I'm happy to take any questions on specifics. I just wanted to draw people's attention to the appendix at the back of the paper, which is the CCG's prioritisation and value for money policy. For those governing body members that have been here for a while, my request is that they remind themselves of the information provided in there about how we make decisions, particularly around decommissioning and disinvestment. For those of us that are newer to the governing body, I ask that we familiarise ourselves with this process, because I think it's really important that as we look at these financial challenges, we make sure that we remain committed to being transparent in our decision making and actually in giving due regard to the process as we move forward. I'll leave it there though, but I'm happy to take any particular questions from the governing body.
So Simon wants to add something.
That value prioritisation and value for money policy, of course, has also been through the Shropshire HOSC, and they've had full sight of it following a rather previously failed attempt in the September of last year. So we've got a policy that the HOSC have seen and are comfortable with and that the board has approved.
Okay, we'll start with questions. Keith.
I've got 1 point and 1 question. Just to be clear from what you're saying, if we're not successful with that management action, then it looks like we're going to miss the control total by 5 million.
Yes.
Just to be absolutely clear for the governing body.
Yeah.
And then secondly, the points about sepsis that you raised, that has been mentioned for quite a few months, but we've been led to believe that that was going to be cost neutral for the CCG, and what you're saying is that that judgment has changed, and that does look as though that could be an additional hit.
We're still awaiting the guidance, but the prudent part of me suggests that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that that could be a potential pressure that comes back to us.
Right. Can I just ask a follow-up question to that? Well, to the first bit of Keith's question. I know you're saying we're doing best, worst and most likely scenarios for a future report. Within our report, we say we've got £5 million of unmitigated risk because there's £6 million of risk and £1 million worth of mitigations. So is the 6 and the 1, are they best or worst cases for those individual things? Because obviously if the 6 is the best case scenario and the 1 is, in terms of the lowest level of risk, and 1 is the sort of the highest, most riskiest assumption of mitigations, then obviously the actual unmitigated risk could actually be a lot bigger. So I don't quite understand, where would you pitch the 6 at?
So the 6, which is the
1.
assessment of the risk, I would pitch at, I kind of class most likely and worst case the same at the moment. They feel about the same. The 1 million mitigating action.
You class most likely and worst as the same?
Yeah. But the 1 million is, or at the time that this report was produced, was a prudent view based on what the team knew to date. Bear in mind that since the month 7 figures were produced, we've had another month of work within the management team to try to make sure that we're covering every base. We've been through every line of our expenditure. So my judgment around the 1 would be that that was
a low-end assessment, and that what you'll see is that for the month 8 report you'll see a much more detailed description of the mitigating actions that we've developed.
And my other point, which sort of follows on from that, is that you talk really well about the HRG4 issue, the sepsis, the shop block and the running cost issue. I personally find that hard to pull out of the report from reading the report as it is.
Okay.
You know, I'm trying to struggle to find where it's written down HRG4. We thought, you know, and I think within that, you know, what you've articulated is very helpful, but I find it hard to read that report and then tie it in with what you've just told us.
No, that's helpful feedback. I'll make sure that for next month we include a context section which wraps that up in 1 or 2 paragraphs so that it's there for us to see.
Good. Further
Thank you.
Question, Rod, was that a question then? If not, then we're asked to note the content of the report. Again, my other issue is we've been asked to familiarise ourselves with the prioritisation policy, but we've not really articulated why we have to familiarise ourselves with it more. Is that because we're going to run it again, or is it because we just thought it'd be a good time to remind us we have one of those policies?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. So we need to know what policies we have in place and that are live at the moment, because as the management team are going through the actions that might be required to make some mitigations, my sense is that we will need to enact the policy. So this is just to bring it back to the front of people's minds, or for those of us that are newer, to actually show us that it's there, so that when we're asked to make decisions, we understand the governance of those decisions and how they've been arrived at.
Because that means at some point we're going to run that process again, or we're currently running it.
It will be run.
Thank you. So if we can note the contents and from ourselves with that report, or that rather that sort of protocol we've got, policy, that'll be good. If not, we'll move on to we'll move on to the contract performance report. I've noticed it's getting hot in here now rather than cold. So performance report, yeah, the corporate performance report, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come on to A&E second, if I may, in report for, I'm sure you'll realise for obvious reasons. Very slightly similar position to last month in terms of our planned care, our RTT, our local provider referral to treatment 18 weeks is now being delivered and has been delivered for 2 months at SAF. We had one over 52-week waiter was at UHNM, a patient waiting for general surgery, but that patient now has a TCI date, and we continue to use all our providers doing very well. They had a blip with their 62-day performance in October, but there was no particular underlying issues there, just a number of complex patient and patient choice issues. Our ambulance handover performance continues to be a challenge. I'm pleased to say, though, it is much better than it was last year, and the only times we have particular pressures are when it's purely down to volumes of ambulances arriving at both emergency departments and their physical capacity to be able to offload those, and that improvement has been acknowledged by the ambulance service. Clearly, accident and emergency remains our biggest performance challenge as a system. Staffing remains a key issue across both emergency departments at the hospital. Likewise, patient discharges before midday. The complex discharge patients, so those patients who need support and either care packages or placements post their acute spell, has improved, and both local authorities are now close to achieving their planned target levels of complex discharges as we plan for the winter pressures in December. And I'd really like to thank our local authority colleagues for their continued support with that. The system has now got its new urgent care director, Claire Old, started on the 1st of December, and she is drafting in her colleagues from the Emergency Care Improvement Programme nationally, and we have Ben Owens, an ED consultant from Sherwood Forest, coming to visit us on Friday of this week. And also Ian Sturgis, one of the national consultants and leads for improved urgent care, has been tasked with supporting 4 sites nationally, one of which is Shrewsbury and Telford hospitals. Claire will oversee a complete refresh of our current plans around and our recovery plans for improvement in A&E, and I'm sure that she'll present that to a future governing body when it's ready. Before I open to question, I did just want to, I think it's worth our governing body noting its thank for all local health staff over the weekend who went above and beyond to maintain patient-facing services during really difficult weather conditions, and particularly also our thanks to members of the public who came in their 4x4s to help get staff to the hospitals. But equally, I'd also like to make a small or significant thank you to our CCG staff who also maintain patient-facing services, particularly within the complex care team, within the prescription ordering direct service, and also our RAS service, our referral assessment service. We had staff walking into work to make sure we kept that open for patients. So I just wanted to say thank you before I open to questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Keith?
I share your concerns about A&E. It's frequently been reported we've got the second worst A&E performance in the country, which is a real concern. And although it sounds counterintuitive, one of the questions that I've got is about the winter pressures money. It's just about the process we go about. Do we ensure that we get a good return on our investments by investing in things like corridor nurses or ambulance liaison staff? Is that actually the best thing to do, or should we be looking at directing our money in different directions?
I think in terms of our winter monies, that those priorities are set by the system A&E delivery board, and that's a view taken by all stakeholders in the system as to where that money should be best directed. We've tried to take a balance across clearly where our pressures are, and obviously patient safety and ensuring ambulance handovers and releasing those crews back out is a priority. Hence we have invested in the corridor nurses for this winter. In terms of HALOs or hospital ambulance liaison officers, those have been invested in nationally through winter monies been allocated by NHS England, so they've not been allocated locally. Other schemes, again, the intention always is every sort of spring we tend to evaluate how we've spent the previous winter's money. Has it had the impact? The majority of our funding this year will go to support escalation capacity within the hospital and the premium costs that will attract. So in terms of impact, that's about keeping patients safe and being able to manage the demand safely and staff those escalation areas to appropriate levels.
Okay, thank you. Simon wants to just...
Can I just come back on that? So what I was trying to get to then, so for each of the areas where we're putting money in, it is based on something that's been previously assessed that it will deliver, and it is worth putting the money.
So I think we just need to... So there are a number of areas that are related to this. Essentially, there's winter monies, the marginal rate emergency tariff adjustment, and the readmissions tariff penalty. All of those are subject to annual reinvestment. Now, what Julie can do might be quite useful, Julie, if at the next board meeting you could bring the evaluation we've done of all of those schemes that underlook that. But for the winter money specifically, a good proportion of it is quite obviously simply to pay staff to open expansion space and pay the staff that are operating that space. So that is not subject to a formal evaluation, because clearly if they didn't open them, we wouldn't be able to cope with the volume of patients. So I think within where we do have specific schemes, they are being evaluated. I think it'd be useful for the board, or at least the F&P, to see those.
Yeah.
Might we go to the F&P?
Okay, thank you. Got a question from Ed and then Jess.
I think we welcome any input we can get from outside agencies looking at it.
Just use the microphone, sorry.
I think it's unrealistic to expect us to be able to turn this round, or staff to turn around the A&E deliveries in the short term. I think if there was a simple answer, they would have done it by now. They're under stress. I think the winter monies and any support that can go should be there to support safety and quality, rather than the focus has to be on the 4-hour turnaround, but that's not going to turn around in the next couple of months, I can't see, and we need to ensure that it's all safe.
Simon, do you want to come back on that?
So that won't be the view of NHS England or NHSI.
I know.
We've made quite a few we have seen improvements of late, and whilst we've had a couple of bad days, so the last few days we've been well over 80%, which I think is a big improvement on where we've been. Claire Old, as you say, is still working 1 day a week with the National Emergency Care Improvement Programme, And Ian Sturgis, who I've worked with extensively in the past, particularly in Leicester, is a really brilliant consultant. And when he was in Leicester for 6 months, performance rose by 15% simply from him being there, really. So I think what he does is demonstrate really, really good clinical leadership, not only within A&E functions, but more importantly across the trust. And I think whilst we have problems within A&E, which are well versed in terms of staffing, clearly the bigger problem is the apparent inability to discharge patients in a timely fashion, which is creating huge bed blocking problems and which results in a lot of admitted patients effectively automatically failing the 4-hour target. So I think Ian is really good at driving those kind of improvements across trust.
Thank you. Ed,
I would echo that. I'm just saying in the next few weeks it will take time for these improvements to come through. I have good faith in both Ian and Claire. I'm just thinking in the short term, in the immediate term, there won't be a turnaround. I can't see. I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong. I think there will be an improvement with the input of Claire and Ian. I think it just may take a slight lag before we get there, and with the current pressures, we just need to make sure that it's safe, was my point, rather than it being no improvement.
I mean, I would also echo that. I would hope there'd be an improvement, but unfortunately I've sat here many times before and been told the next best thing has arrived and the problem's solved, and I'm anticipating being disappointed, but will be happy to be proved wrong. Jess?
Well, first of all, just to note that we've previously expressed, I know I've previously expressed to the Trust the concerns about who actually attends A&E delivery group, who attends A&E delivery board, and making sure there's sufficient clinical input. It sounds like that is being really addressed now, and I'm really pleased to hear that, because we need to have the experts in A&E actually deciding what happens in A&E, and we need to have clinicians helping improve flow. So that's really welcome, and I'm really encouraged by that. I'm just going to take cheeky advantage of the fact that we're being streamed and that we've got press here to say, please, if you don't need to go to A&E, don't go to A&E. It's winter time. Try and explore different options of managing your care. Look at self-care, look at 111, look at Shropdoc, look at your GPs, go to your pharmacists, don't go to A&E.
You'll probably get a job at the camps if you keep going on like that with the public health messages, and yeah, we do need to choose well and choose the right place to access care. I do have a sort of a question, because we do focus a lot on urgent care, and I know it's a priority for NHS England and a priority for us, but in fact it's a very, very small part of the number of people who have contact with the NHS every day. One query I've got is around and I don't know whether it falls under the corporate performance or the contract performance, it is around our commitment to provide 8 to 8 GP services through the walk-in centre. And it has actually been raised by an email I've seen from the public, but it's been something I've been thinking about, is that we're not discouraging people who want to see a GP for a GP problem from going to the front door of A&E and saying, I'm here to see a GP. And I just really worry that the fact we've turned the walk-in centre from Monkmoor into to the hospital, which is good, and it's also being used to help remove some of the pressure on A&E, it's losing its primary purpose of actually being a facility to see people with GP problems who can't, for whatever reason, either through where they work or through the time of the day, access their own GP. And I was wondering what reassurance we can have that when you see the adverts when it's NHS saying for the first time ever your GP is available 8 to 8 over Christmas, what we're saying is that actually for the majority of Shropshire patients is through the walk-in centre. There is some Prime Minister's Challenge Fund availability as well for some people who are in some practices, and obviously some practices do extended hours as well, but I just wonder.
Yeah, and I think as of yesterday, I believe we've got a bid going, and we're made aware of some additional funding to support that GP access and those access hubs that we've obviously got through the Prime Minister's Challenge Fund locally. And I believe we've got a bid going in today that would hopefully expand that county-wide, certainly through to the end of March.
It's also about people.
But it's about we've got to communicate
people can
that.
go to A&E
Absolutely.
and say they want to see a GP in the walk-in centre.
Yes, they can.
And they won't be turned away as being
they will not be turned
inappropriate.
Away. The whole point of that is that that patients, if they do present, can be streamed to the GP service so that they don't put the pressure on ED, but that, as I said, we have taken the very sensible approach that nobody that goes there will be turned away and told to go back to their GP. They will be seen through the walk-in centre that's co-located.
Obviously, we'd encourage people to use 111 first, use their pharmacist, use their own GP.
But nobody will be turned away. If they're there and they need clinical advice, then they'll receive it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions from the
I think on that
board?
one, unless anything's dramatically changed, that walk-in service is capable of seeing a lot more patients than it currently does.
Thank you. Unless there's any further questions, I will note... oh, sorry, William.
Thank you, Chair. It's on cancer 62-day wait. Looking at the sort of 4 months of red performance, am I right understanding that that is due to out-of-county provider performance rather than our local providers?
Yes, I mean we obviously we get the odd breach with Shrewsbury and Telford hospitals, but the majority of that is out of county. We are working with the lead commissioners for those trusts to understand what the plans in place for those trusts to improve their cancer performance, and we're expecting an update on that to come back to. We're maintaining our planned care working group meeting in December. It's on the 28th, and we're expecting reports back from the out-of-county lead commissioners at that meeting, so we'll be able to give an update in January as to the progress for that. It's not as rapid as I would have anticipated.
Okay, thank you. Tim?
Given our enthusiasm for...
Can you move the microphone a little bit closer? Sorry.
Given the enthusiasm for worst-case scenario planning with finances, I'm just wondering about the prospect of a winter that's different from previous couple of winters. To what degree of assurance have we that staff could really cope with something, a real flu outbreak or whatever it was in this winter?
Yeah,
I'll let Simon answer.
So there is a national escalation process now in place around flu, and based largely on the. So what they generally take a measure from is outbreaks in the Far East, in particular, what happens in Australia. So they are concerned about a flu epidemic this winter. I think it's fair to say, isn't it? And therefore they've asked health economies to provide contingency planning to do that, haven't they, in terms of extra beds, which we've done. Now we couldn't do that within available resources, but there is a plan to accommodate it. In terms of 62-day cancer, of course, when the trust comes to looking at planning, winter planning, it is highly unusual that the trust would ever cancel an urgent cancer operation. So they will take precedent over routine elective work, should some elective work need to be cancelled.
Thank you. Professor Thompson-Rod?
Yeah. Just to highlight the flu point, the planning is going on nationally and locally, but one of the key differences that everybody can make a difference on is actually taking up the opportunity of flu vaccination. Our figures are generally speaking better than the national average, but in terms of the new flu vaccination that's available for children, we can get more people taking up that option, and particularly for those individuals who are under the age of 65 but who have a long-term medical condition. Numbers there aren't as good as we would like them to be, albeit that they're better than the national average. So the advice that we'll continue to push is take up that opportunity.
Okay, thank you for reminding us of that. And the other thing is obviously the flu programme has recently been extended, hasn't it? Because up until very recently, anyone who was employed as a carer it was the responsibility of their employer to provide a flu immunisation. It was not an NHS service unless they fell into other categories. Whereas now it's available to go to GP surgeries and pharmacies if you're a paid carer through a company. That's correct, yeah. Any further questions? No, if not, we'll note the two comments, which are Julie to keep chairing months and meetings, and Julie and Simon to continue to attend the A&E delivery board. And then we'll go on to the contract performance report, which I think Charles Miller's going to present. Simon's gone to get his tickets.
Thank you. The month 6 report that you've got, I think, picks up the themes that you'll have seen from previous months' versions of this report, in that the activity on the contracts is pretty much on plan, but as was indicated in the finance report, the finances are not on plan, and again, as Claire said earlier, that seems to be a combination of factors due to the impact of HRG4, some changes in case mix, particularly at Robert Jones as a result of VBC policy, and potential increases in the depth of coding at providers. So I think the message is that whilst the activity is on plan, there is a financial impact that to some extent is outside of our control at the minute. The other area I'd probably want to pick up on is the out-of-county providers, where on the activity side we're seeing some increases in emergency activity, particularly at UH&M, Worcester, Wye Valley and Wolverhampton, which we need to understand why that's happening to the degree that it is. As far as the non-acute sectors are concerned, Shropcom pretty much on plan. A number of issues with the Mental Health Trust, which we've investigated through the contract and understand what the reason for that underperformance is, and that is in discussion with them at executive level to come to a resolution on that. I think the final thing I'd want to pick up on the report is the overperformance on the ambulance contract, which is significant, as you will have seen, and is being investigated by the lead commissioner, Sandwell and West Birmingham, on that, because it's evident in most other CCGs around the West Midlands, with the exception of some of the Staffordshire ones. So it's not just a Shropshire issue; it's a West Midlands wide issue, which at the minute there is no clear understanding of why that should be at the minute. So that work is ongoing at the minute. So I think those are the main points I wanted to make on this report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. If I open it up to questions from the board. Jess.
I think following on that ambulance thing, I know it's not formally understood yet, but there is a concern, isn't there, that it reflects, at least in part, the increased conveyance that comes from 111 switching over to 111, given that the Staffordshire areas that are not seeing this increase in activity are not yet signed up to 111. There is a concern that there will be further problems later down the line. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of that, because I think it's something that we need to be thinking about how we manage. This is a national thing that we have to do, but we really have to mitigate against it, because it seems like it really is increasing activity for the ambulance service.
Yeah, that analysis work is going on at the moment, and you're right, the NHS 111 does seem to be a contributory factor to that. I think there are probably other factors as well, and the experience of what's happening in relation to the RSH site compared to the PRH site seems to be different on that, which we're trying to understand at the minute.
Okay, do you have any further questions? If not, I've got some questions. Rod? No.
I was just noticing the material associated with the Mental Health Trust. I appreciate that we're serving them notice on certain things. Is there anything particularly that the board should be aware of in terms of the underperformance?
I think the cause of that has been understood. It's been appears to have been a change in the way staffing was allocated within the Mental Health Trust, and how that was working with the local authority social workers. So we understand that. I think what we need to do is get a proper rebasing of the contract into position now, which, as I say, requires executive discussion on that. But then there are a number of other performance issues which fall out of that, which we need to progress the contractual action against those.
Okay, thank you. Mike, I've got three questions, and some of them are, again, I'm not sure whether they fall under the corporate, the contract, or the quality report. Some clearly are this report. The first one's around the challenge values with SATH. We've got on page 6, table 3, we've got a list of the first 5 months' challenges. And then at the bottom, in section 19, it says the final figure of the VBC challenges for the month is, for month 1 is to 3 is 38,000. So I was wondering, in table 3, is that, obviously we should have, whether it's fixed and sorted out and reconciled probably months 1 to 3, and are those the final figures, and what do those challenges represent, obviously, and what percentage of that is actually the VBC, or is the VBC on top of that? Sorry?
it's contained within that, but we can disaggregate those to
So is the month one figure 463, is that what we've actually, that's what we're challenging, not what we've achieved, whereas we know what we've achieved for VBC, which is 38,000 for the first 3 months in total.
But
So
that's the figure is what we're challenging. There are some elements of that.
and when do we finish that challenge? When do you know the answer to that? Sorry, when do we as a CCG know the answer? Yes.
So the 38,000 relates purely to South. Yep. So the amount without that purely relates to phase 2 VBC challenges, i.e. procedures that the trust have carried out without a prior approval code. Now, for those 3 months, that figure was about 90,000, wasn't it? Yeah. When we asked them to retrospectively submit work, about 50,000 of that was payable and about 40,000.
Sure. I can understand that's the figure. So how does that tie with table 3, which is purely South as well, isn't it? What are the challenges that are in table?
So it's the other contract challenges.
And when do we know what we've achieved through the challenges?
Well, it's unlikely that we'll be able to agree those locally with SAF, and they'll be subject to some form of regional mediation or arbitration.
And that will be at the end of the year, or is that dealt with on an ongoing basis?
Next week.
So we're going to arbitration next week with SAF? Mediation.
Yeah.
And then arbitration if that fails?
Correct.
Okay, that makes that clear. The second bit was more just a point around this contract report doesn't mention the Shropshire contract. I wonder whether in future we could, that's quite a major contract, whether that be an appropriate place for the Shropshire contract to be. And then the third question is, I think, going back to the question that I interrupted from the floor around, and again, it may be more quality than contract, but obviously there is a challenge and issue around, obviously, the roof falling in at the maternity unit in Shrewsbury, and how we're dealing with that contractually, and also with the reopening of the maternity units early in the new year. Are we dealing with that contractually, or is that just a quality issue?
I think initially it's probably a quality issue, but it would become a contractual issue if they say they can't provide the service. Then we'd pick that up through the
because
contract.
we pay them by tariff, don't we? Although we've got some money put aside to support them.
Yeah.
So in fact, it's not changing what we're doing. So then the question then will come in the quality report about what the impact is and how that goes on to the other bits. Yeah. So we'll do that.
Yes, I mean, it has been discussed at CQRM with the Trust, and they alerted us to the fact previously that there was flooding, and that's why they had to close the unit. The roof had been repaired, and we were advised that it was safe for use. And then, of course, this week or last week, we were told that the snow had caused the roof to collapse. There was no harm to anybody within the unit at the time, and the persons were transported safely to a neighbouring facility. We believe, we've been advised that the roof will be repaired, but not likely to take place until mid-January. So, of course, there is an implication then for where women will be going in that interim period. But the Trust has issued a communication statement on that. So
do we ask them contractually to do a quality impact assessment and a quality impact assessment on that, because it is a service change?
That would be part of it, yes.
Yeah, we'll pick that up with them contractually and have raised it with them before, and the response would be it's in their backlog maintenance programme.
Right, that's fine. Any further questions on the contract performance report? If not, Will, thank you very much for coming to present that, and I think we can. Gail will be back next month. It should be brilliant. Welcome her back. So thank you very much. Move on now to the quality report. I'm sorry if I've derailed things by asking at the wrong time, but if we could back the maternity, but quality report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Reported previously that we were concerned to see a spike, or what appeared to be a spike, in suicides reported through the SSFT, and that we wanted to do a review of previous suicides reported, as you would expect if there was any kind of spikes with tragic deaths. So an early review has been undertaken. We've got a report to Quality Committee next week. and also working with Director of Public Health, who is liaising with the coroner to do a deeper dive in the new year on this, just to see if anything further can be done locally to address this. But interestingly, CQC have also advised us that they'd also noticed a spike in community suicide reported by the Trust, and are in discussions with ourselves, with the Trust on this. We'll report further going forward. We reported previously about workforce issues at the SAF, and Health Education England meeting is taking place tomorrow with NHS Improvement, ourselves, NHS England, and the Trust to look at getting some confirmation on junior doctor allocations. I think it's also an opportunity tomorrow as well to consider the issues that Julie raised earlier about the decisions on when to consider when the ED unit becomes unsafe because of the number of agencies being used there. So that will be as part of those discussions tomorrow. On a positive note, I think it's important to bring attention to the work that's going on as part of the quality premium reduction in E. coli bacteremias. And in October, 25% improvement on trajectory was seen, which means great improvements for patient care, reducing acquired infections. So that's a really positive piece of news. We've discussed the CAMS issue, so I won't go into anything further on that. I think also one of the other things to note is previously reported that we felt that there was a lower level of serious incidents reported by the Trust, the SAF, but with the work that they've undertaken internally, we've seen quite an increase in reporting, which is a concern because they're serious incidents, but it shows also that they're actually reporting, recording and learning from those events. What we will be doing before Christmas is meeting with the Assistant Medical Director, Nurse Director, with ourselves, with clinical leads, to understand how that process is actually working and just understanding exactly how they are learning from those incidents. Again, positive collaborative working, coming from an outlier position where the Trust was identified as a mortality outlier for fluid and electrolyte balance. We are working with the Trust, with the care homes that have been identified where there have been issues on nutrition and treatment escalation plans, to understand what the issues are, work with the local practices, and then increase the improvement on the mortality outlier for the Trust on that particular aspect. I think that's about all to...
Okay, that's brilliant. We'll open it up to questions from the board. We've got Keith and then Deborah.
I just wanted to ask about the Mary Stopes section of it. I wasn't quite clear how important those CQC notices, is that something to be a real concern, or is that more of note?
They are improvement notices, so you'd expect the actions align there. They're not warning notices as such, so they will be monitored in the normal way.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Deborah.
Mine was the same question about Mary Stopes.
Thank you. Further questions? If not, not great. I think one thing would be to highlight something. I mean, obviously, we often focus on the negatives, but I think there's a lot of positives, and one of them is obviously point 22, which is around the new ADHD service that's been instigated. And if you could just tell us a little bit about that, mainly when it starts, and is it a diagnosis service and not a treatment service?
Well, my understanding that it was identified because the service wasn't provided previously. The SSSFT was not able to provide a service for adults with ADHD, so there was inequality of access for those patients. Work from somebody in Julie's team undertook a big piece of work to commission this service to make sure it was properly commissioned, because obviously this is a new service, properly procured, went through quality committee just to look at the provision, the supervision, the management of incidents, and the governance of the processes. And I'm not quite sure when it actually starts, but I believe it should be fairly shortly.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Julie. Sorry.
I will double check, but I believe it's this month, but I'll confirm back to the governing body.
Unless there's no further questions, then we can note the contents of that report and We can move on to verbal reports on Future Fit, and then a verbal report on the STP. Debbie, do you want to start with the...
Thank you. Since the last meeting of the board, we've met with NHS England. As you're aware, you approved the PCBC and the draft consultation documents, which are part of that submission to NHS England. The panel met on the 16th. A couple of clarification points were requested, and we've now had confirmation that, as far as the CCGs are concerned, we have submitted everything that was expected of us. We've also, as part of that work over last month, we met with the Senate Council, West Midlands Clinical Senate. A number of us went to that meeting. The requirement there was that we got assurance from the Council that we'd made sufficient progress on the recommendations of the visit they made in November 2016. And we've received a letter since, or Julian's received a letter since, stating that that is the case. And they were very, very supportive of the programme, commended the fact that we'd progressed to a preferred option, and we're looking to go out to consultation soon. So, in summary, as far as NHS England's requirements are concerned, the CCGs have met those. What is outstanding is the fact that we need confirmation that, before we go out to consultation, that capital could be made available for the scheme, and we have not yet got that confirmation. So that is the outstanding point, and is not in the CCG's gift to confirm. So that sits with discussions between SAF and NHSI at this point. So that's the progress really of where we're at. Because of that, you can imagine that it is now not possible to consider going out to consultation before Christmas. So we would not be consulting until in the new year at the earliest.
Thank you. Questions? Keith.
Do you have any indication about what the timeline might be, or if it even is it going to be resolved about this point about capital between SAF and NHSI?
I mean, I think Simon and Julie might want to comment. At the time of the NHS England panel, it was suggested to us, because NHS Improvement were part of that panel, that it would be around 3 weeks, which is literally this week. That's 3 weeks since the panel met, and we have not yet heard.
So I think it's fair to say that the capital allocation process is not visible to us at this current time.
Debbie, would you say that what we're basically saying is that the work the CCG has done through the Future Fit team has been approved up to a point by NHS England and NHSI. What's outstanding is information around the finances. And is that an issue between, you say it's between SAF and NHSI, or is it between SAF and NHSI and the Department of Health and Finance? So really we're waiting for notification centrally about the allocation of capital before we can actually go out to consultation.
I think Simon summarised it, but I think it's not transparent what that process is to us. But we believe it's a conversation between SAF, NHSI and the Treasury.
I mean, from my point of view, it is quite disappointing, because my initial understanding was that we would get a decision back that would say you're fine to consult, that both the clinical sort of process side was going to be approved at the same time as finance. So I think it is disappointing that we're actually hit a stage where we're delayed because the capital allocation isn't clear, and further disappointing that we can't really give an indication of when we're going to know. And I'm glad to say that we're not going to consult before Christmas, because I'd assume that. It's more, is it going to be January? Is it going to be February? Is it going to be spring? We've not been given any information. I mean, in a vacuum, the risk is that you start, imagining different scenarios.
I mean, I can't comment other than what's already been said. It's very, very disappointing. We are actually ready to proceed to consultation. In the background, we are preparing documents, translation documents, easy read documents. And also we went to the joint OSC a week ago, and they provided us some feedback on the planner, i.e. the meetings and the approach we should take to the public meetings that we have. So we're busy working on that, assuming that we could press a button in January. Can't comment really on the availability of capital because I'm not cited.
Okay, that's fine. Any further questions? If not, thank you very much for that, and we'll have an update from Phil around the STP. I think one of the actions was the STP update was going to be a written update, wasn't it? So obviously, presuming that's from next month then, yes. Phil. Yeah. Thank you. So an SDP update.
Thank you. So SDP programme structure and reporting. So workstream leads are now directly providing input into the SDP report, and it's going to be refined, and I'd say from next month will be a written report. We have Office 365.
Sorry, I can't. Sorry? Yeah, sorry. I think we may need to. I think also that it's noisy. I can't particularly hear either because of the noise from the air conditioning. So I don't know if we can turn up
a bit closer. Is that better?
Yeah, you need to be quite close to them. I think almost,
okay.
almost right.
So reporting continues to be refined, and all workstream leads are now providing direct input into an STP report, and that's going to be written from next month. We have Office 365 that's going to be rolled out across the system, so all partners will be able to provide information, reports, updates into a single platform, and that will be updated weekly and monthly. SDP processes working with the governance, and they're being aligned with statutory responsibilities. The intention being that the STP PMO facilitates as a footprint and develop a single system plan. So that's the intention for that. And again, there'll be an update. All the updates will be red, amber, green as well from next month, so you'll be able to see those on a regular basis. For SDP PMO finances, we're operating within budget, the agreed budget that we're controlled, that's set by SDP partners, and also all partners have been invoiced for 17-18 as well, so they should be coming in with the agreed monies. The SDP PMO team is now fully established. There's a few people to continue starting early next year. We have a couple of new starters over the last week or two. From an organisational development point of view, the King's Fund, we have mentioned that a couple of times. We had the first session with the delivery group on the 22nd of November, and the outputs of that will feed into a session on the 20th of December with chief executives and chairs attending. So that's I think it's a 3/4 day session next Wednesday. So that's happening, and the outputs of the 22nd and a full debrief will be fed into that, and that will be made available. We have applied previously for a scheme within NHS leadership, through transformational change, through system leadership. We didn't get on that last year. We applied this year, and it's looking quite hopeful that we'll get on that. And if we do, again, it'll be a cross-section from the system, so it's not just an STP PMO attending it, it'll be partners and programme managers from within the system attending that. That should, if we get on that, that starts February the 18th. We applied for a strategic leadership programme for STP footprints, where you send 3 representatives for STP footprints. 89 people applied across 44 STPs, and 10 STPs were selected, and we are one of them. So we're on the first course, happened 2 weeks ago. There's a project to be delivered or worked through, and that will be around out-of-hospital care for paediatrics. And that'll be worked up through to June, July next year, where that'll be reported and continued. So we have Telford updates. We have updates now for Workstream 1, 2 and 3. So Workstream 1 is Community Resilience and Prevention, Workstream 2 is Neighbourhood Resilience, and Workstream 3 is Systematic Speciality Review. Around diabetes. The SDP won a 200k funding bid recently to increase structured education into diabetes, and there's a work programme being delivered through that now. Some of the outcomes to date, 546 more people have achieved all 3 target values and now at reduced risk of diabetes-related complications. So that's some of the stuff that's happening in Telford. The Shropshire out-of-hospital programme as work has commenced within the localities to develop the out-of-hospital model of care. Based on the 9 commissioning clusters, and is being overseen by the CCG Design Authority. And work around admission avoidance has been undertaken around rapid turnaround from front door, community beds, crisis beds, hospital, home and community services. Powys Neighbourhood, two main schemes around unscheduled care, improvement and planned care. They're on track and they've been reported on monthly. I'm not going to talk about local maternity services, you've already had the update on that, but they feed into work that we're doing with this. The MSK programme board has been established, following work streams around physiotherapy, SUS, value-based commissioning, rheumatology and communications. People already touched on the urgent care director. We submitted our urgent care tracker to NHS. We've had no questions raised or feedback from that, so we haven't had anything from that. Part of that plan or submission included the winter plan for that, so that's gone in, and we've confirmation that we received 197k funding from NHS as part of that submission.
Okay, thank you. Questions and comments, Julie?
Phil, could I just ask us to confirm that figure, because it's really important for the frailty front door.
Absolutely.
Because Telford have only confirmed back to us that they've only received 190, and I think the plan within the memorandum of understanding, I know it's not material, but the amount within the memorandum of understanding for getting the frailty front door up and running was 194, I think it was. So there seems to be a bit of discrepancy.
I thought it was 197, so we need to agree a number.
Confirm that it is important.
Thank you. Further questions? Dawn.
Thank you. Phil, forgive me coming into this still fairly new, but looking at some of the workforce planning and the group I'm sitting on, there are an awful lot of other groups that will be looking at workforce planning. That you mentioned diabetes and training.
Yes.
How does all of that link together? Because it's going to be vitally important that we're all focusing on the same sort of issues.
Okay,
really.
so there was a section around the programme delivery, around facilitation of transformation. So they basically, I don't particularly like the word enabling, but they're basically enabling groups around digital strategic workforce groups, estates and communications, and they all link, they all talk about workforce generally anyway. There's always a workforce element of it. So the workforce group met in October, and they talked about 3 key areas over the next 90 days, and that's agile workforce, so system-wide working, digital collaboration and workforce intelligence. And there's 3 people that have been identified to lead on that, and again the updates will be via this. But also within the communications engagement and estates, they're talking about workforce as well. So the strategic estates workbook is being completed, and that's again the thing that keeps coming up all the time through all the enabling work groups is workforce.
Okay, thank you, Simon.
So Phil, in the part 2 this afternoon, Simon's coming to talk to the board about the S2P, and many of the concerns here are what is the STP actually doing? And I think one of the concerns from listening to that update is the fact that the pieces of work that affect Shropshire are actually being done by Shropshire CCG. They're not being done by the STP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would just be useful if you could explain to the board how the STP is going to address the fundamental structural issues in this economy.
Okay.
That are not about saying we've got a programme which includes everything that Shropshire's already doing, when it could be already doing it without the STP being there, which I think
absolutely.
is one of the, if I would gauge the sense of the board, is one of the very real concerns about the current level of performance in the STP.
Absolutely. So the part of the role of the STP and the PMO would be to facilitate. So that's happening within Shropshire. It's happening within all the other organisations as well, and it's just pulling it together. So from a PMO point of view, that's part of the facilitation. But that aside, part of the STP, for me, we need to be looking at and talking about on the session on the 20th is a big part of this. We're talking about an integrated system. You can call it an ACS, you can call it an ACO. I don't really care what we call it. It needs to be called something, where we're going down the direction of travel of a single CCG, single provider, and working with a single control total and a single budget, so we can operate at that kind of level. And the 20th session will be a big part of that thinking.
Simon, do you want to follow up?
So we're seeing many other areas, aren't we, Phil, across North Midlands and across Midlands and East, where the regulators are looking to see considerable consolidation of NHS organisations. So I wonder whether you'd just like to make a comment on that day's role. For example, Derbyshire has moved from 4 CCGs to 1 CCG, Nottinghamshire has moved from 6 CCGs to 1 CCG, Staffordshire has moved from 6 CCGs to 1 CCG. In other areas we're looking at provider consolidation and integration. And how are we going to get those kind of issues on the table for our STP?
So for our STP, there needs to be a. So for me, our current Sustainability and Transformation Board is too big. Hasn't got the right membership on it. Going forward, I think it needs to be our chief execs, and they meet monthly at the same session. It's around strategic leadership, agreeing what we want to do, and then we come up with a plan of how we're going to get there. So are we going to be an ACS, an ACO, or just call ourselves an integrated system? Part of the strategic leadership course that I attended and I mentioned earlier on, exactly as you've already mentioned, Simon, there was, I think we were one of the smallest systems in that room, and there were 30 people in the room, and everybody else was looking at or had started a journey to consolidating CCGs and providers. And we have 2, they have 5, 6, 3, 4 CCGs, and they're already talking about it and doing it. We're one of the smaller ones and we're not, so we need to.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments on the STP update? William?
Phil, you mentioned about the budgets of the STP. I don't think I've ever seen any sort of absolute figures.
Yes.
Could you perhaps explain what the overall cost of running the STP is?
So the overall cost yearly for the STP is around 500,000, and that's made up from contributions from providers, and that pays for the STP PMO to facilitate some of this work, and then move our direction of travel on and move support with the projects and programmes.
Is there a CCG contribution to that as well?
Yes, the 500,000 is contributions from providers and commissioners.
And CCGs, sorry.
Within our budget, we have allocated a budget to pay for our contribution to that.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Julian really has gone out to get his tickets or something. So you've got me. Has anybody got any other questions on the STP update?
There must be really important tickets. I was watching the live streaming earlier on. It's the 3rd time he's been.
It's been mentioned several times. It's incredibly important, apparently. Any other questions, Keith?
Not so much a question, just to reinforce the point that Simon's just made. The progress with our STP seems glacially slow.
Yes.
And it's not really very transparent. I think it has got a little bit better, and the reports to the governing body have helped with that. But it seems almost pointless to me as a lay member. It seems to have had no impact on us so far, and that really must change, particularly if it's costing us £500,000.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, any other comments, Tim?
Maybe I'll just reiterate what Keith has said from a point of view of the primary care in North Shropshire.
Yeah.
We know nothing of what's going on with this.
Okay, so you're not part of the delivery group at all? You're on primary care?
I think there's a recurrent theme, isn't there, coming through over several meetings of a need to understand more clearly what's going on.
Okay.
I mean, the principle of an STP where you've got all the organisations, all the commissioning organisations, the provider organisations working together across boundaries and breaking down those false barriers between organisations is a good one, it's sound. But I think what people need to understand is how that's actually working in the system. Okay. Because at the moment, a lot of the work that's happening is still within organisations, and that's not in the spirit of an STP. Okay. But we do have that session this afternoon to further dig into that. Is there anything else that anybody wants to say?
Can I just make one point as well? So that from an NHSE point of view, there is no plan B. We're either going to be an accountable care organisation, system, integrated care, whatever we want to call it. There isn't really a plan B. Funding in the future will be based on ACS footprints. So natural progression is STP, ACS, ACO, and there's various degrees in between, but that's the direction of travel. Money in the future will be based on ACS footprints, in my view. And if we don't become an ACS, or at least agree to become an ACS, we'll lose out on funding as well in the future. That's my view, by the way.
Yes.
Sorry, Shilandra, yeah.
Do we have a deadline to reach that point?
No.
No, I think it's more about a recognised direction of travel, isn't it? Again, trying to be as efficient as possible, trying to get rid of false barriers, trying to do more collaborative work. Yeah. And intuitively it makes sense. but we just need to actually see it demonstrated with within our own footprint, and we're not seeing that at the moment. But as I say, we've got that session this afternoon.
We have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to read out a list of committees for exception reporting. If anybody wants to make any comments, the chairs want to make any comments. Sarah's not here, so I don't know, Simon, you've got anything you want to raise from the Clinical Commissioning Committee? No. Meredith, Quality Committee?
No, thank you.
Okie doke. Julie, A&E Delivery Board? Keith?
Might be just worth saying we've got a further regional escalation meeting with NHSI on the 21st of December in Derby.
Keith, Finance and Performance? Primary Care Commissioning? And Locality Chairs, Tim? Shailendra? Deb? No, you can have it back now.
So my daughter thought we had a burglar at home.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Right. So I tell her it was from the garage. Sorry about that. We'll open up to questions from members of the public. You want to start with yourself with the question you're going to ask? We've still got the microphone. Karen's.
Well, I can talk quite loudly.
That's right, and Karen's coming anyway. But yes, yeah.
You have mentioned that the MLU in Shrewsbury is closed temporarily, and you're looking for alternatives. But right now, does that mean that the extra pressure is on Telford? Does Telford have adequate beds? And if it doesn't, how about opening the rural maternity units again? And just to bear in mind that only 72,000 of the 306,000 people in Shropshire live in Shrewsbury. Everyone else has to travel. And getting from Ludlow to Telford takes all day to get there and back if you've got...
Okay, thank you, Simon, if you can answer.
I think those are very reasonable questions. I don't know the answer to those, but I'm quite happy to take them up with SATH for you. Obviously, as a provider of the service, they will have appropriate contingency plans. I don't know whether that's everybody goes to Telford or they open the MLUs. I don't know. I haven't spoken to them, but I will do, and we'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? We'll go in reverse order from last time. So, Mr. D.
Thank you, Chair. I had one question until Phil's spoken. Now I have two, with your permission. Firstly, I'd like to go back to the finance report and the appendices dealing with prioritisation. I was puzzled by the word familiarise, as I believe the Chair was for a moment. But I think I understand now that this is approved policy.
Yes. Yeah,
and okay, that being so, I would comment that I think there are defects in it. Although it deals with, firstly, communication with the public, which is a major piece of the text of the slide set. The process flow diagram, which I think is Appendix Roman 1 or Appendix Roman 2, shows it tacked on the side at the beginning and then no further public engagement, and that seems to me to be poor. The other part of it is that although the detailed project forms ask for risks and mitigations associated with those the proposed projects, the assessment and prioritisation process itself takes no account of a risk score. And that seems to me to be curious, to say the least. It takes account of other things like doability and so on, but that's not the same as risk. So I think I would welcome comments there.
Okay. Julie, would you like to comment on those questions? Or Simon?
I think, thank you for those comments. We'll need to take them away and have a look at them. I think what I would say, in terms of communication with the public, I think it would entirely depend on what was being considered. So that could mean anything from communication through engagement to full public consultation, depending on what service was going through that. So I think obviously there are statutory obligations of a CCG that this policy doesn't trump, if you see what I mean. But we will take those comments away.
I just add as a corollary, would you care to comment on whether the improved process, when you have looked at it again, will be used as part of the MLU consultation?
No, this is a prioritisation policy around looking at services that we currently provide, I think, in the decommissioning policy. So we've got a separate engagement policy.
Okay, I'll take a rain check on that if I may. Second question. When Phil was speaking, you were talking, is he still in the room? Oh, there you are, thank you, sir. You were describing, and Jess admirably described the sentiments behind the STP and the aspiration to reach across borders and bring things together sensibly. What puzzles me is, having listened to Debbie's report and the deferral of Future Fit, as to whether the interaction between these two is possibly fatal to Future Fit. One of the reasons I would hypothesise that you are having difficulty getting capital assessments is that NHSE is probably sitting back and saying, until we see what Shropshire does in terms of STP, we have no idea whether this is actually a sensible capital decision to make.
I think within that, there's a few points. One is the Future Fit is clearly part of the STP process. With that final point, that isn't true. NHS England have signed off our plans. We are purely waiting for the approval of the public dividend capital, which is from the government, really. So they're two separate things. Simon, do you want to comment further? Simon? No. Okay. Jill? I'm trying to remember, trying to do the order backwards. It's like a memory test.
Sorry, a few just to be awkward. The first one, I gather Shropdock has ended its support going into community hospitals, and that was confirmed at the last community trust meeting. So I'm just trying to work out what's going on with this. Was this a contract between Shropdock and the community trust, or Shropdock and the CCG? What happened to cause the contract to end? What are the implications for patients, and are there risks, or does this affect the clinical nature of patients able to go into hospitals? Basically, what's going on with that?
That's fine. Let's Simon bring you up to speed on that.
So I'll come, Jill, to the impact in a minute, but I think it's fair to say that what we've uncovered is a whole series of legacy issues where it's not really clear whether a contract was in place at all, and whether this was just something that had existed pre-TCS days. So this is back in the old days of when PCTs provided services, and of course when the community services were within the PCT activity. There was a block of money in which Shropdock were doing a number of things which weren't subject to detailed service specifications. So what we have agreed with Shropdock, as I understand it, is that they will continue to do the service. And we have got to a point now where we are supporting Shropdock through to a re-procurement of the service next September, and that is the current plan. During that period, there have been a number of attempts to redefine that service, which we've resisted, and therefore, as far as I am aware, there is no impact on patients or admission to community hospitals at the current time. If any member of the public feels that that is the case, if you can bring it back to us, we will take it back to Shropdock and Shropcom.
Okay, thank you. Second question.
I think it'd be great if you could clarify that with the community trust and with Shropdock now, Simon, because they're very different stories.
We will certainly do that and come back to you. Okay.
And certainly that's at odds with what was reported to the community trust board. Second question, I'm still trying to locate the Optimity report, the second report that I requested.
We'll have it sent to you.
Wonderful. And also
Sorry, I think Sam wants to come
That was emailed to you yesterday.
I obviously didn't check all my emails yesterday. Moving at the speed of lightning.
You might need to check a different inbox, a junk box, or.
No. It'll be marked urgent in there. Also, to repeat last month's request that the CCG will share your data from your out-of-hospital work and community services review work, because you always tag on, and we'd very much welcome alternative options, alternative proposals from the public.
Yeah, I did pass on your request for both those things,
Yeah.
so I'm sorry if they've not been actioned.
It'd be great to kind of get stuff back, basically.
Sorry, Sam would like to...
I think my understanding was that the data that you required was contained in the optimity report, so maybe once you've had a look, there's several appendices.
It was a more general, well, when I've read the report,
yes, come back if that
sounds like you may have seen the report, but if you'd like to read the report first and then come back. Sure. We do need to move on because I think we may be a bit too soon.
Third question, I've got some concerns about people falling through the net with neurology, and I'd welcome a quick word with Julie at the end of the meeting.
Urology?
Yes.
As in bladders and things, with a U or neurology?
Sorry, with a N-E-U-R. Brain.
Neurology, yes.
Nervous systems.
Neurology, yes, yeah. So we all have concerns about that.
And also, following Phil's report, is there any chance of the STP starting to operate more transparently and publicly? Because if you guys don't know what's going on, then think about how bad it is for members of the public, and ultimately it's our NHS, and it'd be great to know what goes on in it.
I think, Jill, so we're not in any way of a view that the STP is not transparent for us. I think what we're saying is we need it to start doing things at a much greater scale, scope and pace to be able to contribute to the CCG's agenda.
And I think one of the things...
I think that's what we're saying.
I think what I'm saying is it'd be great if the public could see minutes of meetings, or meetings could be held in public.
I think that would need to be addressed to the STP board. I mean, I think I was distracted
But if the CCG could take that view back to the STP, because it does operate completely in a vacuum, and it's not possible for us to have any sight of what it does.
Okay, we need to move on. Shall we, David and then Mr Bickerton? Sorry, Karen's behind you.
Thank you, Chairman. Last month I visited the North Country, as I think most of your board know, and was party to writing a report with several members of the Conservative Party. The point I'd like to make, Chairman, is that if you want to learn how to see a good trust run, you would go up there and have a look yourselves at Northumbria. I would also recommend that you consider going up to look at Stockton and Hartlepool. Basically, you're hitting a brick wall as far as the emergency services are concerned. They're not getting any better. We see stuff in the Shropshire Star saying, well, second worst performance in the country. This can't continue to go on. There are solutions, and really, I feel that you, as a...
That's fine, David. What's your question? Sorry.
Well, the question is...
thank you for your
the
point.
question is, are you prepared to learn? That's the question. Are you prepared to learn from Northumbria? Are you prepared to learn from Stockton and Hartlepool? Because if you don't, you're going to be presiding over a really bad service.
Okay, thank you very much. We have taken lessons and learned and looked at multiple examples around the country of different models, but thank you for that. And the final question from Mr Bickerton.
Can you tell me why the board put a public consultation document to the NHS without putting in place where the finance was going to come from?
So we didn't put no, that's the actual sort of process. It's like driving on the left. That is the process.
And secondly, how many more public consultations will there have to be before we finally get to the end of Future Fit?
There hasn't been any public consultations. We're hoping there'll be one public consultation for Future Fit, one public consultation around the changes to the maternity services, and we are doing a community review, and it may be that consultations need to come out of that, but we haven't done any public consultations yet, and we are ready to do them as soon as we get approval around the finances, and the maternity one is around the going through the process of the Telford and Wrekin board, and then obviously checking with NHS England around their assurance process in the HOSC. But
when do you think Future Fit will actually be put into practice?
Well, I think we've already answered that clearly, that we're dependent on finding out when the finances is, then we go out to consultation, we analyse the responses from consultation, we then review that, we develop a full business case and a decision-making business case, and then we go and build it, and it'll be sort of 2021 or something before it's finished. Thank you. If there's no further questions, I'd like to draw this part of the meeting to the close, and our next meeting is in early January at a time and a date to be confirmed. So thank you very much. Mercedes moving on the car.